Welcome back to Potter Red, where the old blood remembers. Today's story: a dying house elf revealed the Potter's hidden manor and its sleeping wards to Harry at age 6. Before we step through the gate, do smash that subscribe button and ring the bell so the next tale finds you the very moment it drops. Settle in. Now let's begin. Chapter 1: The weeding. The kitchen at number 4 smelled of other people's breakfast a long while before it smelled of Harry's. He stood on the wooden stool at the cooker, turning bacon that was not for him, and counted the rashers so he would know how many were missing if the count ever went wrong. 6 for Uncle Vernon, 4 for Dudley, who would ask for 2 more and get them. 2 for Aunt Petunia, who ate hers standing at the counter and pretended she had not. The fat spat and settled. Harry moved the pan off the heat before it could brown too dark, because dark bacon meant a raised voice, and a raised voice on a Saturday could fill the whole day. He was 6 years old and small for it, and he had learned the kitchen the way other children learned their letters. Petunia came in with her hair still flat on one side. She looked at the pan, then at him, and something in her face closed like a drawer. "Plates," she said, and Harry fetched 3 from the cupboard he could just reach if he went up onto his toes. He set them out without being told which was whose, because he already knew, and she watched him do it with the particular stillness she kept only for him, the stillness of a person watching a thing she would rather not have in the house. "When you've done," she said, "you'll do the garden. Marge is coming at 2 and I won't have you underfoot." "Yes, Aunt Petunia, and the front bed, not just the back." "All of it, yes, Aunt Petunia." Dudley thundered down the stairs then, and the morning tipped toward him the way it always did, the whole house leaning after the sound of him, and Harry stepped back against the counter to be out of the path of it. He was good at being out of the path. He had a talent for corners, for the half-inch of a doorway where a person might stand and not be seen, and he used it now while his cousin climbed onto his chair and Vernon lowered his newspaper long enough to say good morning to his son and no one else. Harry ate his own breakfast standing, a slice of bread folded around the last of the margarine, and he ate it slowly so it would last, watching the garden through the window over the sink. It was going to be a hot day. The lawn had the pale, tired look grass gets in late July, and the privet along the back fence had thrown out its wild summer growth, pale green fingers reaching up past the neat dark wall of the hedge. He liked the hedge. It was the one thing in the garden that wanted to grow past the shape it had been given, and no matter how often Vernon clipped it square, it kept reaching quietly at the top in the corners for something over the fence. "What are you gawping at?" said Dudley through toast. "Nothing," said Harry, and it was true. He had learned that too. When the family had finished, he cleared the plates and stood at the sink to wash them, and a moth that had come in overnight blundered against the window over the basin, beating itself soft against the glass in the way trapped things do, wanting the light and not understanding the pain. Harry watched it a moment. Then he dried one hand and cupped it slow over the moth so it went still against his palm the way small, frightened creatures did for him, and he carried it to the back door and opened his hand into the morning, and it lifted off his skin and was gone over the fence. He came back to the sink before anyone thought to ask what he was doing at the door. He had found long ago that it was easier to be kind quietly. Kindness done where the Dursleys could see it made them suspicious, sure he must be after something, and so he had learned to do it in the corners, in the half-seconds, quietly, where no one thought to look. His whole world fit in the cupboard under the stairs, and he had made it as much his own as a cupboard could be made. A tin soldier with one arm found in the gutter that Dudley had thrown out years ago, a smooth gray stone from the common that fit his thumb. A page torn from a picture book, a castle on a hill with a flag, that he had kept because he liked to look at it before he slept and imagine himself very small and walking up the long road to the gate. He knew the shape of the dark in there better than he knew the shapes of most people's faces. He knew which stair creaked when Vernon came down heavy in the morning, and which when Dudley crept for a midnight raid on the biscuit tin, and he knew the exact hour the light came through the vent in a thin gold bar and crossed the ceiling and went out. It was a small kingdom, but it was quiet and it was his, and he had learned to want very little, which is a thing a child should never have to learn, and which Harry had learned so early he did not know it was unusual. By 9:30 the sun was already hard on the back of his neck. He knelt in the front bed first because Petunia had said the front, and he pulled groundsel and chickweed from between the marigolds and shook the soil off the roots the careful way, so the marigolds would not come up with the weeds. He was gentle with the roots he meant to keep. He did not know why he was gentle. It only seemed a poor sort of thing to tear up what you meant to leave. A woman walked past with a small dog and did not look at him. A boy from down the road cycled past twice and did not look at him either. Harry had stopped minding this in the way you stop minding a stone in your shoe you cannot get at. It was always there, and you walked on the side of your foot that hurt less. He kept his head down and his hands in the dirt, and he thought about nothing at all, which was a thing he was very good at, a kind of quiet he could go into like going into a cool room. The sun climbed. He moved from the front bed to the side, and from the side to the back, where the shade of the hedge lay thin and blue along the fence and the smell of privet was strongest, green and dusty and a little bitter, the smell of the hottest part of summer. His knees ached. His shirt, which had been Dudley's and was still cut for a boy twice his width, hung off him and stuck to his back. He was near the far corner where the hedge met the fence and the shadow pooled deepest when he heard the breathing. It was not the wind. The wind in the privet made a dry rushing sound, all the small leaves moving at once. This was slower than that, and it came from low down, from inside the base of the hedge where the branches thinned to bare wood and the ground went soft with fallen leaves. Harry went still. He thought of a cat or a fox or one of the hedgehogs that sometimes came through from the common, and he did the thing he always did with frightened animals, which was to make himself smaller and slower and to breathe out long so whatever it was would know he meant no harm. He parted the branches. For a moment he could not make sense of what he saw, because it was the size of a small child and it was not a child. It lay curled on its side in the leaf litter, thin as a bundle of sticks, its knees drawn up and its long fingers folded together under its cheek. Its skin was gray-brown and creased like old paper that had been folded and unfolded many times, and its ears were long, longer than its whole face, and drooped now against the ground. It wore a scrap of cloth that had once been a garment. On the front of it, worn nearly to nothing but not quite, was a shape stitched in thread that had kept a little of its color, a deep old red gone the brown of dried blood, a stag standing, its head up, its antlers spread like the branches of a winter tree. Its eyes were open, they were enormous and green-brown, and they were looking at him. Harry did not run. Later he would wonder at that, because a sensible boy would have run or shouted for his aunt, or at least pulled his hand back. He did none of these things. He crouched lower and he looked into the great tired eyes in the dark of the hedge, and the thing looked back at him and its cracked lips moved. "There you are," it whispered. The voice was very old and very small, worn down to a thread like the stag on its clothing was worn down, and it spoke like a traveler who had been walking toward this moment a long time and had only just arrived. Harry knelt in the leaves. He did not understand, but he understood being tired, and he understood a thing that had come a long way, and he did the only thing that seemed right, which was to stay. "Are you hurt?" he asked. "Old," said the creature. "Only old, old and far from home." One of the folded hands came loose and reached, trembling, and Harry, without deciding to, put his own hand out to meet it. The fingers that closed around his were cool and light and dry as leaves, and they held on with a strength that had nothing to do with the body they belonged to. "Let me look," the creature breathed. "Let old Mella look at you. Yes, yes, James's chin. That is James's very chin, that stubborn little chin. Oh, and the eyes." Its own eyes brimmed and spilled without any change in its face, the tears simply running down into the leaves. Lily's eyes, green as the first of everything. They always said. "But to see it, you know my mum and dad," Harry said. His own voice had gone strange. No one spoke of his mother and father except to close the subject. They had died in a car crash, he had been told, and he had been given to understand, the sort of people it was better not to ask about. He had a name for them and nothing else. He had never had their chins. "You knew them," said Mella, and a sound came out of her that might have been a laugh in a stronger throat. "Mella carried James Potter on her shoulders when he was smaller than you. Mella sewed the hem of Lily Potter's summer robes the week before her wedding with her own hands, and Lily kissed the top of Mella's head and called her friend. Friend. The word seemed to cost her something. They did not know, they could not be told. It was decided long before them, and they grew up not knowing, and Mella held her tongue as she was bound to, all their little lives, and then they were gone." The grip on his hand tightened. "But you are not gone, you are here, and I have found you in time, barely in time." A door opened somewhere behind the house, and Petunia's voice came thin across the garden. "Harry, is that bed done?" He froze. The whole of number 4 seemed to reach toward the hedge, and he pressed himself lower into the shadow, and beside him Mella went so still she might have been a knot of roots. "Not yet, Aunt Petunia," he called, and kept his voice even, kept it dull, the flat, blank voice that made grown-ups lose interest. "Nearly. Well, get on." The door shut. Harry let his breath out. When he looked back, Mella's enormous eyes were fixed on the house with an expression he had no name for, something between grief and a very old anger, and then they came back to him and softened all the way through. "They keep you small," she said. It was not a question. "They keep you in the dark and they keep you small, and they have never once told you what you are." Her fingers moved against his, feeling the thinness of his wrist, the places where the bone came close to the skin. 6 years, she whispered. 6 years I have looked, from house to house and hedge to hedge, walking when I could not do the other thing any more, when the magic went out of my legs, following the thread of you. And here at the end of me, here in a garden with no love in it, I find the last potter weeding another man's flowers." Something went through her, a shudder that started at her folded knees and traveled up. "No, no, that will not stand. Listen to me, child. Listen close, because Mella has not much left, and there is a thing you must be told, and a thing I must do, and both must happen before the light goes." Harry listened. Around them the garden ticked with heat and the small, dry stir of the privet, and the shadow held them both, and he bent his head close to the old gray face and listened, and nothing in the world had ever been more worth his listening. "There is a house," said Mella. "It is yours. It has always been yours, and its like has not been raised in England for 1,000 years. Her voice, thin as it was, changed as she spoke of it, gathered a kind of light. Heartsmere. The seed of the Potters from before they were called Potters, from Linfred who healed the sick when kings could not, from Hardwin who wed the lady of the Peverills and brought her deep magic under one roof with his own. Heartsmere, where the heart drinks at the mere at dusk and the water remembers his face. They hid it, child. Long ago in a hard time the family folded it away out of the sight of the world and let its great wards fall down into sleep, and went to live in smaller houses, ordinary houses, so that no enemy would ever find the true heart of the line. And the years went by and the family forgot as families do. Your grandfather forgot, your father was never told, but the house did not forget, and the elves did not forget. Elves, said Harry. We, said Mella, and touched the stag on her breast with 2 fingers, gently, the way you might touch a sleeping thing you loved. The house elves of Heartsmere, bound to the stone and the blood of it, we kept faith. All these long years we kept the hearths banked and the ledgers straight and the dust off the portraits, waiting for a Potter to come home and wake the house and let us serve again. And when word came, the terrible word, that James was dead and Lily was dead and the little one carried off no one knew where, the others said, he is lost, we have failed, there is no more to be done. But Mella, her chest rose. Mella was oldest. Mella had rocked James Potter to sleep. And Mella said, while there is a drop of a Potter alive in this world, I will walk until I find it or until I am dust. And I walked out of the gate that has not opened in 100 years, and I have been walking ever since. She was quiet a moment, gathering breath, and when she spoke again her voice had gone soft and inward, the voice of someone turning over things kept a long time in the dark. You should know what waits for you, so you are not afraid of it, for it is a great thing and great things frighten the unready. Picture it, child. A valley the maps do not show, folded shut like a hand around a coin. A house of grey stone with 100 windows and a roof of green slate gone silver with lichen, and a tower at the west end where the old clock has not struck since the ceiling but keeps still the true hour, waiting to be wound. Below the terraces there is water, the mere, still and dark and deep, and the stone heart stands at the head of the stair with the moss grown into his flanks, and on autumn evenings, before the ceiling, a living heart would come down out of the wood and drink there, and the water would hold his face, and the family took it for a sign that the line went on. There are gardens gone to a soft green wildness, and a long gallery hung with the faces of every Potter that ever was, and they will speak to you, child, do not be afraid when they speak, they have been waiting to speak longer than you have been alive. And there is the library, something like reverence crossed the ruined old face. Oh, the library, rooms of it. Books that were old when your father's father was a babe, books Linfred wrote in his own hand, the whole memory of the line kept dry and safe against the day an heir would come to read it. Harry had stopped breathing quite properly. He sat in the leaves with his mouth a little open and the whole impossible weight of it settling over him, and it did not feel like a story someone had made up to comfort him. It felt like being told the true name of a place he had visited in sleep. And there were people in it, Mella went on, quieter still. James used to slide down the great stair on a silver tea tray, and Mella caught him at the bottom every single time, until he grew too big and knocked us both flat, and how we laughed. He would hide in the airing cupboard on the second landing where the pipes ran warm and the linen smelled of lavender, and think no one knew, and we always knew. We let him think he had won. And Lily, when she came, your mother, she learned all our names the first week and never once got them wrong, and she would sit in the kitchen with us of an evening and drink cocoa and ask us to teach her the old words, the elf words, and she laughed at how badly she said them, and she never, not once in all the time I knew her, looked through one of us as though we were a chair or a broom. The cool hand found Harry's again and gripped. That is the family you come from. Not the grand magic, though there is grand magic, and not the gold, though there is gold. That, people who learn your name and catch you at the bottom of the stair. That is what has been waiting for you behind a wall of years, and it is real, and it is close now, closer than it has been in your whole life. Harry looked at the frail bundle of her, at the folded stick-thin legs that had walked 6 years to hedge and little winging, and something moved in his chest that he did not have a shape for, a heat behind the eyes, a fullness in the throat. He put his second hand over hers so that her cool fingers were held between both his warm ones. You found me, he said. I found you. Her eyes closed for a moment and opened again, slower. And now I am at the end, child, and you must be brave, because there is no more walking in me, and there is only one thing left that Mella can do, and I am going to do it, and then I am going to rest. A tremor took her again, longer this time. The house sleeps. Its wards lie under 100 years of dust, and they will not wake for just anyone, no. They would burn a stranger to ash at the gate sooner than let him in. They will wake only for the blood of the line, and even then only if the way is opened, only if a hand that loves the house lays the road down for the heir to walk. I am that hand. I am the last of us who can still do it, and I have kept the strength for it. I have hoarded it like a coin sewn into a hem, all this walking, all this while. She drew her hand free of his, and it took her a moment to do even that, and she pressed both her palms flat against the leaf litter, against the bare earth beneath, and she bowed her head over the ground. Take off the glove of yourself, she murmured, though whether to Harry or the earth he could not tell. Let the old blood show. The air in the hedge changed. Harry felt it before he saw it, a pressure that came up through his knees where they touched the ground, a low hum he heard in his teeth more than his ears. The fallen leaves around Mella's hands stirred though there was no wind. A light began under her palms, not on top of the earth but somehow within it, a deep green gold glow like the sun coming through many leaves at once, and it ran out from her hands in thin bright lines, following the roots of the hedge, following the grain of the soil, going down and away, north and a little west, out under the fence and out under Little Winging, and out under all the sleeping ordinary miles between here and somewhere else. Mella was speaking now in a tongue Harry did not know, old and rustling, the sound the privet made in the wind-given words, and with every word she spoke the light dimmed in her and brightened in the ground, pouring out of the small gray body into the long bright road she was laying down. Mella, Harry said, frightened now because he could see her going thin, could see the light of her leaving her. Mella, stop, almost, she breathed, almost, give me your hand, the right one. Quickly, child, quickly, while I can still see to do it. He gave it. She took it in both of hers, which were cold now, cold as the earth, and she turned it palm up, and she bent her head and pressed her cracked lips to the center of his palm, and she spoke 3 words into it that he felt rather than heard, 3 words that went into his hand and up his arm and into the middle of him, and lit something there that had been dark his whole life without his ever knowing it was a lamp. Heat bloomed in his palm. When she lifted her head there was a mark on it, faint, the color of a healing bruise going gold at the edges. The stag, head up, antlers spread. It did not hurt. It felt the way it feels to come inside on a cold day and find a fire already lit. There, Mella whispered and sank back, and her whole body seemed to fold smaller, the light nearly gone from her now. There. The road is laid and the air is marked, and the house will feel you, oh, it will feel you before the sun sets. It will turn in its sleep like a great old dog hearing a step it knows. Follow the pull, child. When you feel it tug behind your breastbone, follow it. It will take you home. Barrow will be at the gate. Tell Barrow. Her voice was failing. Tell Barrow that Mella did not stop walking. Tell him she found James's boy. Tell him. I'll tell him, Harry said. He had gathered her up without meaning to, had drawn the light dry husk of her against his chest and folded his arms around her the way no one had ever folded arms around him, and he held her in the blue shade of the hedge and felt how little of her there was left to hold. I'll tell him, but you have to come with me. You have to show me. You can't. You have to come too. Oh, child. She reached up and her cool hand found his cheek and stayed there, light as a leaf come to rest. Ella has come as far as Mella can, but look how far it was. Her eyes found his, and for all the tiredness in them there was something in them now that was almost unbearable to look at, a brightness, a completion, the face of a creature that had set out to do one impossible thing and had done it. I was so afraid I would fail them, all these years, that I would lie down in a ditch some cold night and the last of you would go on somewhere alone and never know, and instead I get to hold him. I get to see the eyes, her hand pressed very gently against his face. You be brave and you be kind, kind most of all, kinder than they were to you, and you go home and you let us love you the way we have wanted to love you your whole life long. Will you do that, James's boy? Will you let us? Yes, Harry said. His face was wet. Yes, I promise. Good. Her hand slid down to rest against his heart over the place where the pull would come. Good. That is all Mella wanted. That is all. Her eyes stayed on his and stayed, and the brightness in them did not dim exactly. It simply grew until it was larger than the small gray face that held it. And then it was too large for the hedge, and then it was somewhere else, and the body in Harry's arms went as light and quiet as a coat with no one in it. The last of the green gold glow ran out along the road she had laid, away under the earth, north and a little west, carrying her the way a river carries a leaf, gently, all the way home. Harry stayed very still. He did not cry out. Something in the manner of it, in the completion of that great tired face, told him this was not a thing to cry out over, whatever it was, and so he held her, and he rocked her the small amount that rocking her required, and the privet stirred its dusty summer smell over them both, and the mark in his palm kept its faint gold warmth, and far off, so far it was less a sound than the memory of a sound, something enormous drew a slow breath and turned over in its long sleep. He did not know how long he knelt there. The shadow of the hedge had shifted by the time he moved, gone longer and bluer, and the heat had begun to lean toward evening. He looked down, and there was no body in his arms. There had been, he knew there had been, he could still feel the light dry weight of her. But between one breath and the next she had gone the way the glow had gone, drawn down and away along the road, and where she had lain in the leaf litter there was only a small white flower he did not know the name of, growing from the bare earth on a stem no thicker than a thread, its petals open, though flowers of that kind did not grow in July and did not grow in shade and had certainly not been there that morning. Harry touched it with one finger. It was warm. He sat back on his heels in the blue shade and let the strangeness of it move through him without trying to make it into anything. A person had come to him out of nowhere and had been glad, glad all the way through, to see his face. She had known his mother's laugh and his father's chin. She had walked 6 years on legs no longer than his arm to tell him he had a home, and she had spent the very last of herself doing it, and then she had gone somewhere he could not follow, and left a warm flower and a warm mark and a road he could feel in his chest. No one had ever spent anything on him before. He had been fed and clothed in the cheapest way that would not draw questions, and reminded of the cost of it, and that was all, that was the whole account of what had been given to him in 6 years. And here was a creature he had known for the length of one hot afternoon who had emptied her entire self into his hand, and called it the thing she had wanted most. He did not have the words for what that did to him. He only knew that he would not forget it, not the eyes going bright at the end, not the cool hand on his cheek, not the 3 words pressed into his palm, not any of it, not ever, for as long as he had a memory to keep it in. The bees worked the buddleia along the fence, drowsy in the heat, and the sound of them was the only sound. Harry breathed in the green dust of the privet and breathed out slow, the same slow breath he gave to frightened things, though there was no frightened thing here now but himself, and he found that the breathing helped him too. Harry, Petunia's voice cut across the garden, sharp now, the 2 o'clock sharpness that meant Marge, that meant the good tablecloth, that meant get out of sight. Harry, where have you got to, if that bed is not coming, Aunt Petunia? He wiped his face on the shoulder of Dudley's old shirt. He looked once more at the white flower, and because it seemed the only thing to do, he broke off a sprig of privet and laid it beside the flower, the same as people did at the war memorial in the town, and then he closed the branches over the both of them, gently, so the shade would stay. He curled his right hand into a fist around the warmth in his palm. Then he backed out of the hedge and stood, and his knees were printed red from the ground, and he walked up the garden toward the house that had never once been his home, carrying inside him now the certain knowledge that somewhere to the north and a little west there was one that was. He weeded the last of the back bed with his marked hand, because it seemed important to finish what he had told her he would do, and all the while the warmth in his palm beat softly, like a second small heart, and behind his breastbone, faint as the first star, a pull he had never felt before had begun. At 2 exactly the low blue car came grinding into the drive, and Marge heaved out of it with her cases and her dog and her voice that filled a room before her body did, and Petunia went out onto the step with her cheek offered and her tea towel still in her hand, and Vernon boomed, and Dudley was produced and admired and given money. Harry watched a corner of it from the hall while he carried in a case too heavy for him, and it struck him, standing there with the handle cutting his fingers, how loud they all were, and how little any of it touched him now. He had a secret the size of a valley folded up inside his shirt. He set the case down where he was told and said nothing and was not thanked, and none of it stung the way it used to, because a person who has been given a home does not feel the cold of a house that was never one. Petunia caught his eye over the top of Marge's head and jerked her chin toward the stairs, which meant gone, out of sight, and Harry went, and was glad to go, because the cupboard was quiet, and in the quiet he could feel the thread. They put him in his cupboard before the tea was poured, which suited him. Marge did not like him and her dog liked him less, and Petunia preferred him folded away out of sight when there were guests, and Harry, who had spent his life being folded away, went into the cupboard under the stairs without complaint and pulled the door to and sat in the dark on the thin mattress with his knees drawn up, exactly the way Mella had lain in the hedge, and opened his hand. The mark was still there. In the dark of the cupboard it gave off the faintest light of its own, no brighter than the glow of a watch face, the stag standing in his palm with its antlers spread. When he looked at it, the pull behind his breastbone grew stronger, a steady, insistent tug north and a little west, as though a thread had been tied to the middle of him and someone very patient and very far away had taken up the other end and was waiting, not pulling hard, only holding it taut, only letting him feel that they were there. Above his head the house of the Dursleys went about its evening. Marge's laugh like a drain emptying, Vernon's answering rumble, Dudley wheedling for something and getting it, the clink of the good china. Harry sat in the dark under all of it and did not hear a word because he was listening instead to the pull, and to the memory of a worn-out voice saying home, and to the slow, enormous breathing of something 100 years asleep and beginning, at last, to wake. Once in the middle of the evening, Marge's dog came snuffling down the hall. Harry heard the click of its nails, and then the wet working of its nose at the crack under the cupboard door, and he went still out of long habit because the dog had bitten him once and been praised for it. But this time, when it caught his scent, it did not growl. It made a low, uncertain whine instead and backed off, its nails scrabbling on the parquet, and would not come near the stairs again for the rest of the night. In his palm the mark had warmed the moment the nose touched the door, warmed and given off a breath of that green-gold light, and Harry had closed his fist over it, and the dog had fled from the thing it could not see. He sat with that a long while. It was the first time anything in that house had ever chosen to keep away from him instead of the other way around. The evening wore down. Marge was put to bed in the spare room with a last brandy and a great deal of fuss. The television muttered and went dark. The stairs creaked once, twice, as Vernon came up and the landing light snapped off, and the house of number 4 sank into the deep suburban quiet of a Saturday gone midnight, the quiet of drawn curtains and locked doors and people who believed the world was exactly the size they had been told. Harry lay back on the thin mattress with his marked hand open on his chest over the pull, and he did not try to sleep because there was too much lit up inside him to sleep. But sleep came anyway, the way it does to the very young when the body has done more than the day, and it took him down gently, and it took him somewhere. He stood at the foot of a road. It was night in the dream, but a warm night, thick with the smell of cut hay and cold water, and the road ran up between dark hedges toward a shape against the stars that his waking mind had no word for, and his sleeping mind knew at once. Windows. 100 windows, and all of them dark but one, and in that one a light burned, small and steady in gold, high up under the eaves, the light of a lamp set in a sill by someone who had gone to stand beside it and wait. Down the long slope of the valley the water lay black and still and held the stars doubled, and at the head of a great stone stair a stag stood, carved, moss-flanked, and as Harry watched, the carved head turned, slow, stone grinding softly on stone, and looked at him down the length of the road, and its eyes in the dream were the eyes of the small white flower, warm and knowing him. "Come home," said the house without a voice, the way houses speak in dreams. "We kept the light on." And behind his breastbone the thread drew tight and sweet and sure, and he took one step up the road, and the whole valley leaned toward him like a face turning to the sun. He woke in the dark of the cupboard with the pull stronger than before, and the certainty of the dream still on him like the warmth of a hand just lifted away. It was not yet dawn. The thin gold bar of light had not come through the vent. Somewhere north and a little west a lamp was burning in a window for him, and had been burning, he understood now, since the moment the road was laid, and would go on burning until he came. He was 6 years old, and he had nothing in the world but a one-armed soldier and a smooth stone and a torn page of a castle on a hill, and now, folded quiet in the middle of his hand, a way home. He would go. He knew it as surely as he knew his own name, more surely than that, because his own name was the one the Dursleys used, and this was older and truer. He did not know how far it was or what he would find at the end or how he would slip the leash of Privet Drive to walk it, and none of that seemed to matter against the simple fact of the pull, and the light in the window, and the promise he had made in the hedge. He would go, and soon, and there would be someone at the gate who had waited 100 years to catch him at the bottom of a stair. He turned his hand so the little stag caught what light there was. "Hartsmere," he said, very quietly, trying the word, and the word felt like a key turning. In his palm the mark warmed, just perceptibly, the way a hand warms when another hand closes over it. Somewhere to the north and a little west, though he could not have known it, a light came on in a window that had been dark for 100 years, and an old elf named Barrow set down the ledger he had carried through a century of waiting, and lifted his head and listened. Chapter 1 and Chapter 2. The road remembers Harry woke before the birds, in the grey hour when the world has not yet decided to be a day, and lay still on the thin mattress with his marked hand open and the pull steady in his chest, and knew that this was the morning. He had not planned it exactly. A boy of 6 does not make plans the way grown people do, with lists and hours. But he had gone to sleep with the road running under his breastbone and the light burning in the window of his dream, and he had woken with the certainty of it whole and quiet inside him, the certainty that if he did not go now, while the house of the Dursleys lay drowned in the deep sleep of a Sunday after too much brandy, he might not get another door as wide as this one. Marge would keep them late abed. Vernon would not stir before 9. Petunia had drunk 2 sherries she thought no one had counted, and Dudley never rose before there was breakfast to rise for. The house would sleep, and the world outside it would be empty and cool and unwatched, and the pull said north, and a little west, and now. He dressed in the dark by feel, which he was good at, and he did not put on Dudley's cast-offs but the one shirt that was almost his own, a grey thing gone soft with washing that fit him nearly, and he laced the trainers with the hole in the left toe, and he sat a moment with the tin soldier in his hand before he put it in his pocket because it seemed a thing that ought to come. Then he eased the cupboard door open, holding the latch so it would not click, and crept out into the hall. The house breathed around him. Vernon's snore came down the stairs in long saw strokes. The grandfather clock that had been Marge's wedding present to them ticked in the front room. Harry went on the outsides of his feet, past the coats, past the telephone table, to the kitchen, and he took the back door key from its hook and turned it slow in the lock, easing the bolt back a hair at a time so it would not thud. And then the door was open and the morning came in cool and green-smelling, and he stepped out onto the step and pulled the door to behind him and stood in the garden of number 4 for what he understood without being told. Might be one of the last ordinary mornings of his old small life. The pull turned him. It was gentler than a hand on the shoulder and more certain than any hand had ever been, and it turned him toward the back gate, toward the alley behind the gardens, toward the north and the west, and Harry went down the wet grass past the hedge where a white flower grew warm in the shade, and he laid his palm flat against the gate a moment over the good clean smell of creosote, and then he lifted the latch and went out and did not look back. The alley was empty. The road beyond it was empty. Little Winging lay under its Sunday hush with the milk not yet on the steps and the curtains all drawn, and Harry walked down the middle of the empty road with his hands in his pockets, and his heart going quick and light, following the thread, and the thread led him out past the last houses and the last street lamp, and onto the lane that ran between the fields toward the common and the woods beyond. And here the world began very quietly to change. He noticed it first in the light. The gray of the dawn should have been thinning toward the ordinary flat white of a Surrey morning, but instead it thickened and warmed, went the deep gold green of light coming through many summers of leaves, though the sky overhead stayed pale and empty. He noticed it next in the hedges. The clipped municipal hedges of the lane, all privet and hawthorn cut square, gave way without any seam he could point to older hedges, taller, wilder, hung with dog rose and honeysuckle, and the deep hum of bees, though it was too early yet for bees. And the road under his trainers changed from tarmac to packed pale earth worn smooth in two ruts by the wheels of carts that could not have passed this way in 100 years. The air smelled of cut hay and cold water, and something under that, something old and clean, like the inside of a church, like stone that has been rained on for 1,000 years. Harry slowed. Some old wary part of him wanted to turn and run back for the ordinary lane, the part schooled to flinch at anything new. But the pull was warm and it was sure, and the road, he understood now, was not an ordinary road at all. It was the road Mella had laid down with the last of her light, running under the sleeping miles from a hedge and little winging all the way to the valley the maps did not show. And to walk it was to fold up the distance between, so that each step took him further than a step should, the ordinary countryside sliding past on either hand faster than his feet could account for. Once a hart stood at the edge of a wood and lifted its head and watched him go by with dark liquid eyes and did not run, and Harry lifted his marked hand to it without deciding to, and the hart dipped its antlered head once grave as a bow and turned and walked back into the trees. He walked, and the road remembered his feet, and it carried him home. He could not have said how long it took. The gold-green light did not move like ordinary daylight. It hung, steady and warm, out of time, and the valley when it came did not come the way a place comes into view over a hill. It unfolded. That was the only word he had for it afterward. The high wild hedges on either side of the road drew back like curtains, and the land dropped away before him into a hollow that had not been there and then was there, deep and green and shut all around by wooded hills, and at the bottom of it lay water, dark and still and wide, holding the pale sky doubled and unbroken, so that a heron flying low across it flew across two skies at once. And above the water, on a shoulder of rising ground, terraced and gardened and gone to a soft green wildness, stood the house. Harry stopped at the head of the road and looked at it, and something in him that had been holding very tight let go, all at once, the way a fist lets go, and he understood that he had been holding it tight his whole life without ever knowing there was another way for a hand to be. It was gray stone, and it was vast, vaster than any building he had ever stood before, longer than the whole of Privet Drive laid end to end, with 100 windows dark and blind under a roof of green slate gone silver with lichen, and a tower at the west end where a great clock face stood stopped, and gables and chimneys past counting, and long low wings that ran back into the trees so that he could not see where the house ended. Ivy had climbed it to the second floor and hung in green ropes from the eaves. The gardens below it had spilled their borders and grown into one another, roses gone wild through the yew, a fountain choked with fern, a stone stair descending in broad gray flights toward the water, and at the head of that stair, moss grown into his flanks and his carved eyes turned out across the mere, stood a stag. It was exactly, precisely, in every line and shadow, the house from his dream, and every window of it was dark. Harry came down the road toward it slowly, and the closer he came the more he felt the change in the air, a weight, a watchfulness, the sense a person gets of a room they thought was empty when they realize someone is sitting in the dark of it, not moving, watching them come. The pull had gone quiet in his chest, hushed, waiting. The gardens were silent, no bird sang here. The bees he had heard along the road had not followed him down into the hollow, and the great house stood over the still black water and gave no sign of life at all. And Harry, walking up toward the gate in that enormous listening silence, felt very small and very young, and a long way from anyone who knew his name. The gate was iron, black and old, set in a wall of the same gray stone, and worked in the metal of it, rusted but unmistakable, was the stag, head up, antlers spread, the twin of the mark that lay warm in his palm. It was shut. There was no handle on it, no lock, no bell. Harry stood before it in the gold-green light, and he did not know what to do, and so he did the only thing that seemed true, which was to lift his right hand and lay it flat against the cold iron, palm to the stag, mark to mark. The gate did not open. Instead, the air came alive. It began as a hum, felt in the teeth and the bones of the chest before it was heard, the same low note that had come up through his knees in the hedge when Mella laid the road. It ran along the top of the wall in both directions, out and away, and where it ran, a thin light woke in the stone, not on the surface but deep within it, blue-white and cold, tracing lines Harry could not have drawn, patterns older than writing, running out from the gate along the wall and up the terraces and across the dark face of the house itself, waking line by line an enormous sleeping geometry of light. The still water of the mere shivered. The stopped clock in the tower gave a single deep groan, iron waking against iron, though its hands did not move. And the light in the wall gathered itself and turned, and Harry felt it turn, felt the whole vast intelligence of the place come slowly, ponderously, terribly around to face him, the way a great old beast in the dark of a cave lifts its head from its paws and opens one enormous eye and looks. It was not gentle, that was the thing no one had told him. The wards of Hartsmere had slept 100 years, and they woke hungry and suspicious, and they did not know him yet. They knew only that something small and warm and alive was standing at the gate with its hand on the crest. And the light in the stone burned suddenly hotter, whiter, and a cold came off the iron under his palm that was not the cold of morning, but the cold of something deciding whether to let him live. The stag in the gate turned its rusted head, grinding, and looked at him, and its eyes were pits of that same blue-white fire, and the pressure of the place bore down on him, testing, weighing, reaching into him with fingers of cold light to find out what he was, and Harry understood with the whole of his small body that if it did not find what it was looking for, it would burn him where he stood and scatter him on the water and go back to sleep, and never know it had killed the thing it had waited for. He did not run, he wanted to, every animal part of him wanted to. But he thought of Mella walking 6 years on legs no longer than his arm, and he thought of the light in the window, and he pressed his hand harder against the cold iron instead of pulling it away, and he lifted his chin, and he spoke to the great waking eye of the house in the only language he had. "I'm Harry," he said. His voice shook and he let it shake. "Harry Potter. James was my dad. Lily was my mum. Mella found me. She walked all that way and she found me, and she gave me this. She put it in my hand and she said you'd know me. She said tell Barrow. She said you kept the light on." The cold bit deeper into his palm and he held it there, and his eyes stung and he did not look away from the burning stag. "Please," he said, "I came home. Please let me be home." And the mark in his palm answered. Woke against the iron the way a coal wakes when you breathe on it, the green gold light of it flaring out from under his hand and running into the crest, into the stag, up the arm of the gate and into the wall. And where the warm gold light met the cold blue-white fire of the wards, the two of them touched and knew each other, and Harry felt the recognition go through the whole vast waking house like a word passing from mouth to mouth down a long, long line of the waiting dead. The blue-white fire did not go out. It changed, the cold went out of it and the hunger went out of it, and something else came into it, something that had no name in any language Harry knew, but that he understood at once and completely, because he had waited his whole life to be looked at like that and had never once been, until now. The house knew him, and the house was glad. The cold left the iron under his palm and warmth came into it, and the stag in the gate bowed its blazing head, and every line of light in the walls and the terraces and the 100 dark windows swelled at once to a brightness that made him throw up his free hand against it, gold and blue and white all running together, the whole geometry of the wards blazing up out of 100 years of sleep in a single indrawn breath of the house, and then, as gently as a held breath, let go. The light sank back down into the stone and dimmed and banked itself to a low steady glow, like coals, like a hearth kept in, and the gate before him swung silently inward on its ancient hinges, and beyond it the great stone stair ran up between the wild gardens toward the doors of Hartsmere, and one by one, from the tower to the furthest wing, the 100 windows of the house began softly to fill with light. Harry stood on the threshold with his hand still raised against a brightness that had already gone, and breathed, and the pull in his chest had become something else now, not a pull anymore but a settling, a warmth spread all through the middle of him, the feeling of a key that has turned and a door that has opened and a place that has been reached. Then he stepped through the gate, over the old worn stone of the threshold, the first Potter to cross it in 100 years, and the gardens of Hartsmere breathed out their long-held breath around him in a wind that stirred the wild roses and carried down to him the smell of green things waking, and somewhere up in the vast lit house a bell began to ring. It was not an alarm. It was a wild, tumbling peal, high and bright, a bell that had waited a century for a reason to ring and was ringing now with everything it had. And under it Harry heard other sounds beginning, doors flung open, quick light feet on stone, voices calling to one another in a language he did not know but whose brightness needed no translating, and he went up the great stair between the roses with the stone heart standing sentinel at the top. And when he reached the summit of it and came out onto the wide terrace before the doors were already open, and an old, old elf was standing in them and looking at him and weeping. He was taller than Mella had been, though still no higher than Harry's chest, and he was very old, older than she had seemed, his skin the gray of river stone and his ears drooping and his back bent under the weight of the years. He wore not a scrap of cloth but a proper livery, worn and mended and immaculately clean dark green, with the stag stitched over the heart in thread that still held its old deep red, and around his thin neck on a chain hung a great iron key, and in his hands, which shook, he held a leather ledger he had plainly been carrying when the bell began, and had not thought to set down. His eyes were fixed on Harry's face, moving over it, feature by feature, and the tears ran down the deep creases of him and dropped from his chin, and he did not wipe them away. "Master Harry," he said. His voice was deep for so small a body and worn, and it broke on the words. "Master Harry Potter, you have come home." "Are you Barrow?" Harry asked. The old elf's face crumpled and reformed. "I am Barrow, sir, steward of Hartsmere. I have kept this house against your coming for 101 years, sir, I and those below me, and I had begun." His voice failed, and he mastered it. "I had begun to fear I would keep it to the end of me and never see this day. And here you are, and you have James's chin, and you have—" He stopped. Something moved through him. "You have Lily's eyes," he said very low. "She told me, she would have told you that. Mella, where is Mella, sir? She went out to find you." Did she come with you? Is my sister at the gate?" The brightness went out of the morning, just for a moment, just around the two of them, and Harry stood on the terrace of his ancient home with the bell ringing overhead and the household of Hartsmere pouring out through the doors behind their steward, dozens of them now, small and gray and dressed in the same worn green livery, spilling out onto the terrace and stopping, all of them, stopping and going silent one by one as they saw the look on their steward's face, and Harry had to be the one to say it. And he did not want to, but he owed her that. He owed her the truth spoken plainly to the ones who loved her. "She found me," Harry said, "yesterday, in the garden where they keep me. She walked all the way there, she told me, 6 years, and she found me, and she was so happy, Barrow, she was so happy she cried. And then she used the last of herself to make the road so I could come home, and to wake up my hand so you'd know me, and after she did that she was too tired to walk any more." He held out his marked palm, the little stag glowing faintly in it, offered to the old elf like the only thing he had, which it was. "She told me to tell you she didn't stop walking. She said tell Barrow she found James's boy, and then she went. It didn't hurt her. She was smiling. There was a white flower where she'd been, and it was warm, and I laid a bit of privet by it, and I said sorry I didn't know her name for longer." His own voice had gone thick. "I'm sorry. She was your sister, and I only knew her for one afternoon, and I already love her. I'm sorry I couldn't bring her back to you." For a long moment Barrow did not move at all. The bell rang on overhead, wild and bright and terrible now against the silence on the terrace, and then the old steward's knees gave slowly, and he did not fall so much as fold down onto the worn gray stone, and he bowed his head over the ledger in his hands, and he wept openly, the deep silent shaking of the very old, who have said goodbye to so many and never learn how. And around him the household of Hartsmere, the cooks and the gardeners and the keepers of the linen and the polishers of the silver, all the small, gray, loyal people who had held faith with an empty house for 101 years, bowed their heads too, and the terrace of the great waking manor filled with the sound of them, older and gentler than any human sound, a low keening that rose and fell like wind in the wild roses. Harry did the only thing he knew to do. He crossed the terrace and he knelt down on the stone in front of the old steward, and he put his arms around the small, shaking body as he had put them around Mella in the hedge, and he held Barrow while he wept, a strange child holding the oldest servant of his house on the threshold of a home he had known for the length of a single morning, and the ledger of 100 years was pressed between them, and the bell rang and slowly, slowly quieted. After a while Barrow drew back. He wiped his face at last with a green sleeve, and he looked at Harry with his ancient streaming eyes, and something in the ruin of his face had steadied into something else, into resolve, into purpose, into the deep, unbreakable devotion of a creature that has at last, after 100 years, been given someone to serve. "She found you," he said. "That is what matters. That is the whole of what matters in the end. My sister walked out of a dying house, and she would not lie down until she had done the thing she swore to do, and she did it, and she brought the light of it all the way home, and no elf of Hartsmere has ever done a braver thing in all the long years of this house, and I will see that it is remembered." He gathered himself and rose, small and bent and immensely dignified, and he tucked the ledger under one arm and drew himself up as straight as his old back would let him, and he looked out over the household, over all the waiting gray faces, and he spoke, and his broken voice rang out clear across the terrace. "The heir of Hartsmere has come home," he said. "The wards know him. The house has taken him. From this hour Hartsmere wakes, and its people wake, and we are servants again, and we have a Potter to serve." He turned back to Harry, and he bowed, very low, the whole household bowing with him in one soft rustle of green, so that Harry stood alone and upright among a sea of bent gray heads. "Master Harry Potter," said Barrow. "Welcome home, sir. Now come inside out of the morning and let this house do what it has been aching to do for 100 years. Let us feed you." They brought him in through the great doors, and the doors were carved with the hunt and the mere and the standing heart, and beyond them was a hall so high that the golden morning light came down through tall windows and slanting bars thick with the dust of the household's waking. And a fire had been lit, somehow already, in a hearth a grown man could have stood up in, and the flames of it threw gold across a floor of gray and white stone worn into gentle hollows by the feet of 10 centuries of potters. And Harry stood in the middle of that vast, warm, shining space and turned around slowly to take it all in and could not. There was too much of it. It was too large and too old and too beautiful, and it was his. The elves moved around him with a quiet efficiency that had nothing servile in it, nothing cringing, only competence, only care, the care of people doing at last the work they were made for and had been denied. A chair was brought, an old carved chair with the stag on its high back and set by the fire, and Harry was guided into it, and it was far too big for him, and he sat in it anyway with his feet not reaching the floor. A footstool appeared for his feet. A blanket, soft, deep green, was laid over his knees, and then the food began to come. It came from a door at the far end of the hall, borne by a stout, brisk elf woman in an apron whiter than anything Harry had ever seen. Her round face still wet from crying and set now in an expression of fierce, tender determination, and behind her came others with more. And Harry, who had spent his life eating folded bread, standing up and counting rashers that were not his, watched a table drawn up beside his chair and laid for him, only for him, with more food than he had ever seen gathered in one place. Warm bread and butter in a dish, actual butter, gold and soft, a brown egg in a cup with a little knitted hat to keep it warm, bacon, and it was not counted, there was simply as much of it as could fit on the plate, porridge with cream poured into it in a spiral and brown sugar going molten on the top, apples cut into slices and arranged like the petals of a flower. A pot of cocoa, thick and dark, poured into a cup with a stag on it, his cup, Harry understood without being told, his own cup that had been kept for him for 100 years. The brisk elf woman set the cocoa down in front of him with hands that shook only a little, and she looked at him, at the thinness of his wrists, at the shirt gone soft with washing that fit him nearly and no better, at the hole in the toe of his trainer, and her round face worked, and she pressed her lips together hard, and she said, in a voice that fought to stay steady and mostly won, "You will eat, Master Harry. You will eat all of it, and then you will eat more, because Tibbet can see. Tibbet is not blind. Tibbet can see exactly how they have kept you, and it will not stand, sir. It will not stand another day, not while there is a kitchen in this house and breath in Tibbet's body." And then she could not hold it, and two great tears went down her round cheeks, and she dashed them away furiously with the corner of her apron and said, "Now eat, before it goes cold, and do not mind me, I am only being foolish." And she stood back with her hands folded and watched him with a hunger of her own, the hunger of someone who has waited a very long time to watch a child be fed. Harry looked at the food and at the fire and at the ring of gray loving faces watching him, at Barrett with his ledger and his tears, at Tibbet with her white apron, at a young elf near the front, no taller than the others but somehow newer in the face, who was gazing at Harry with his enormous eyes shining and both hands pressed over his mouth to hold in whatever was trying to burst out of him. And Harry picked up the spoon and he ate, and it was the best thing he had ever tasted, all of it, every mouthful, warm and rich and given freely and asking nothing back. And about halfway through the porridge he began quietly, without fuss, to cry, because he did not know how else to hold what was happening to him. And no one told him to stop, and no one was cross, and the young elf at the front broke at last and came running to kneel by his chair, and the others gathered close. And they let him cry into the best breakfast of his life in the great gold hall of the house that had waited 100 years to love him, and it was, though he had no way to measure such things yet, the beginning of the best day he had ever had. When he had eaten all he could, which was more than he had thought a body could hold, and the crying had passed off into a kind of warm, wrung-out quiet, Barrow came and stood by his chair. "There is time for everything, sir," the old steward said gently. "Time to see the house and the gallery and the library and to meet those who have waited to meet you, and there are those in this house who have waited even longer than we have, and are even more eager, though they cannot come down the stairs to you, sir, being fixed where they hang. But not all today. Today you are tired, and today we have a thing to do first, all of us together, and I think, sir, if you are willing, it should be done before anything else." He hesitated. "It concerns my sister, if you would come." Harry set down the stag cup and slid off the great chair and gave Barrow his hand, and the old elf took it as if it were the most precious thing ever offered him, and led him from the hall, and the household came behind, quiet now, out through a side door into the wild gardens where the roses had climbed through the yew, and the morning light lay thick and gold across 100 years of gentle ruin. Barrow led him along a mossy path to a place where the garden opened out, sheltered, walled, an old herb garden gone to seed and sweetness, and in the middle of it, where four paths met, a thing had happened in the night. A briar had grown there. It had not been there yesterday, Harry understood, from the way the elves looked at it, the way they slowed and hushed as they came into the little garden. It had grown in the night from nothing, from the bare earth where the four paths crossed. A briar of pale green stems arched over into a low round bower no bigger than a cradle, and it was covered, every stem of it, in white flowers, the same white flower that had grown warm in the hedge in Little Winging. Hundreds of them open, glowing very faintly in the shadow under the leaves, and the air all around it was warm and smelled of nothing Harry could name, something clean and far off and kind. "The house brought her home," Barrow said quietly. "I did not know if it could after so long a sleep, but it felt her go wherever she was. It felt one of its own let go of the world, and it reached out with the last of the strength she had given it, and it gathered her, and it brought her here to the heart of the garden she tended when she was young, and it has made her this. He touched one of the white flowers with a trembling fingertip, very gently, the way you touch the face of someone sleeping. This is Mella now, this is where she rests, and it will bloom here, sir, white out of season, for as long as Hartsmere stands, and every elf of this house will know, walking past it, what one of us did and what it means to keep faith. He looked up at Harry. It is our way, sir, we do not have graves like men. When one of us has served with a whole heart to the very end, the house remembers us into something living. There is no higher honor a house can pay. And there has never, in all the years, been one more deserved. Harry knelt down on the mossy stone where the four paths met in front of the white briar, and he looked at it a long time, at the hundreds of small, warm, glowing flowers that were somehow the old elf who had walked 6 years to find him and had gone out smiling at the end. And he reached into his pocket and took out the one-armed tin soldier, the treasure of his whole small kingdom, the thing he had brought from the cupboard without knowing why, and he understood now why he had brought it. He set it down at the foot of the briar, standing it upright in the moss, its one arm raised, keeping watch. He hasn't got both his arms, Harry told the briar softly, so he knows about doing things the hard way. He'll look after you. He's the best thing I've got, so I want you to have him. He sat back on his heels. The flowers glowed. Thank you for finding me, Mella, he said. I'm going to be brave, and I'm going to be kind, kindest of all, like you said. And I'm going to look after everybody here forever, I promise, so it was worth it, so the walking was worth it. He put his marked hand flat on the warm earth in front of the briar, palm down, as she had done in the hedge. I won't ever forget your name. Behind him, the household of Hartsmere stood among the wild roses in the gold morning light, and bowed their heads and were silent, and the white briar glowed, and somewhere a bird, the first bird Harry had heard in the valley, began at last to sing. They let him rest after that in the hall by the fire, wrapped in the green blanket, and he did not mean to sleep, but he slept, worn out by all of it, by the road and the crying and the largest breakfast of his life. And when he woke, the light through the tall windows had gone from gold to the flat white of an ordinary Surrey afternoon, pressing in at the edges of the valley's magic, and Barrow was sitting on a stool beside his chair, waiting. Watching him sleep with an expression so quiet and so settled that Harry lay still a moment and did not let on he was awake, just to let the old elf have it a little longer. You are awake, sir, Barrow said without turning. I can always tell. I watched your father sleep and his father before him. A potter's breathing changes. He turned then, and his old face was grave. And now, sir, I must be the one to say the hard thing, because I am steward, and it falls to me to think of what comes after the gladness. You cannot stay. Harry sat up. The blanket slid from his shoulders. What? Not today, Barrow said gently. Not to live, not yet. I wish it were otherwise. There is nothing in all the world Hartsmere wants more than to keep you, sir, to keep you here in the warm, and never let the cold of that other house touch you again. But it is not so simple, and I will not lie to you, not ever. That is a promise I make you now. This house does not lie to its heir. There are protections on you in that other place, old ones laid by a powerful man, blood magic that ties your safety to your mother's sister. And if you were simply to vanish, those protections would break, and worse things than the Dursleys would come looking, and Hartsmere is not yet strong enough, not after 100 years of sleep, to stand against all of them at once. Do you understand, sir? The house has only just woken. Its wards are old and thin in places. It needs time as you need time to grow into what it is, and so, for now, you must go back. The warmth of the day drained out of Harry, and something cold and familiar came into its place, the old cold of the cupboard, the cold of a house that was never a home. But I found you, he said. I don't want to go back. I hate it there. Please don't make me go back. Barrow leaned forward and took both Harry's hands in his small, dry ones and held them hard. Listen to me, Master Harry, and hear the whole of it before you despair. You must go back, but you will not be alone there, not for 1 hour, not ever again. The road Mella laid is yours now, bound to your hand, and it will open for you whenever you have need of it, at the back gate, in the quiet hours, and bring you here and take you home again in the space of a held breath, so that no clock in that dreadful house will ever have moved. You will sleep under their stairs, and you will wake in this hall as often as you can slip away, and we will teach you and feed you and love you and grow you strong and grow the house strong alongside you, and when you are old enough and the house is ready, then, sir, then we will bring you home for good, and no man living will be able to take you back. That is the promise of Hartsmere, not that you never go back to the cold, but that you will never again go back to it alone, and never for long, and never ever, believing that there is no one in the world who wants you. His old eyes held Harry's. Can you be brave a little longer, sir? Can you keep our secret and carry it in the cold place and hold on, knowing we are here and yours and waiting? Harry looked at the old elf and at the great gold hall and at the fire and at the household gathered quiet in the shadows at the edges of the room, all of them watching him, all of them his, and he thought about the difference between a cupboard you sit in believing no one will ever come and a cupboard you sit in knowing exactly where your home is and exactly who is keeping the light on. They were not the same cupboard. They would never be the same cupboard again. Yes, he said, I can be brave. I've had lots of practice. And then, because it was true, and because he wanted the old elf to have it, it's not so bad now going back, because now I know the way home. Something eased in Barrow's ancient face. He lifted Harry's marked hand and pressed his brow to it, briefly an old and formal gesture, a steward's homage to his heir. And then he rose, and the household rose out of the shadows around him. And they gathered to send Harry home the way they would come to send him home 100 times in the years ahead, each of them pressing on him some small thing to take, a warm roll wrapped in a cloth from Tibet, a smooth white pebble from the mere pressed into his hand by the young elf whose name, Harry learned now, was Corin, a sprig of the white briar from Barrow himself to keep, to remember. And they walked him back out through the great doors and down the terrace and along the gardens to the gate where the road began, and the sun was low now over the wooded hills and the valley was filling with the blue of evening, and the windows of Hartsmere, all 100 of them, were lit. Go on, sir, Barrow said softly at the gate. Put your hand to the stag and think of the back gate of that house, and the road will open. And Master Harry, the old elf's voice caught. Look up before you go, look at the west tower. Harry looked. High up under the eaves of the great stopped clock, in a single window, a lamp had been set in the sill, and it burned, small and steady in gold, exactly as it had burned in his dream, and a shape stood beside it, small and grey and bent, a keeper of the light. That is Hessa, Barrow said. She has kept a lamp burning in that window every night for 101 years, sir, against your coming home in the dark. And she will keep it burning still, every night you are away, so that whenever you look to the north and the west in that cold place on the worst of your nights, you may know that it is lit, and that it is lit for you, and that a light in a window means a person is expected and wanted and waited for, and will be met at the door. He put his hand over Harry's, over the mark, and pressed it to the cold iron of the stag. Now go home, sir, and come back soon, we will be watching for you. Harry laid his hand on the stag and thought of the back gate of number 4, and the road opened before him, gold green and warm, running up out of the blue valley toward the ordinary world, and he stepped onto it. At the last, at the very edge of the light, he turned and looked back once at the great lit house and the still dark water and the ring of small grey people at the gate lifting their hands to him in the dusk, and at the one lamp burning high in the west tower, and he lifted his own marked hand to all of it, and then he turned back toward the cold, and the road took him, and folded the miles, and set him down in the alley behind the gardens of Privet Drive in the last grey light of the same Sunday evening. With a warm roll in his pocket and a white pebble in his fist and a sprig of impossible flowers over his heart, and behind his breastbone, no longer a pull now but a knowledge, quiet and permanent and warm, of exactly where, in all the wide indifferent world, he was loved. Chapter 2 and Chapter 3. What the house remembers. By the end of the first week, Harry had learned the trick of slipping away. It was easier than he had braced for because the house helped, and the house was clever than any Dursley. When he needed to go, in the grey before dawn or in the long empty afternoons when Petunia sent him to his cupboard and forgot him, he had only to lay his marked hand on any threshold, any door, the cupboard door itself, and think of the gate of Hartsmere, and the road would be there, folded up small and waiting behind the ordinary wood, and he would step through and be home. And while he was gone, Barrow had told him, the house kept a kind of quiet over number 4, a seeming, so that if Petunia thought of him at all, she thought only that he was where he was supposed to be, dull and silent and out of the way, and did not look too closely and did not count the hours. It was not a lie so much as a letting be. The Dursleys had spent 6 years not wanting to see Harry Potter. The house of Hartsmere had simply, gently given them what they wanted. So he came and went, and the coming got into his blood, and each time the valley unfolded before him he felt the same thing loosen in his chest, and each time it loosened a little further, until the going home stopped being a marvel and started being a fact, the truest fact of his life, the fixed point everything else turned around. On the third visit, Barrow took him to see the house properly. They began in the great hall and worked outward, and Harry walked through his inheritance with his mouth open and his neck craned back, and could not take it in because there was too much of it and it was too old. There were rooms he had no names for. A dining hall with a table 40 feet long and 100 chairs, and a ceiling painted with a night sky in which the real constellations turned slowly in their true courses, so that you could tell the hour and the season by looking up while you ate. A music room where the instruments tuned themselves when the door opened, and a harpsichord played 3 notes of a welcome and then fell shy and silent. A room that was nothing but maps, floor to ceiling, of places that were not on any map Harry had seen, coastlines that moved with the tides, a chart of the stars, a plan of the valley itself with a small inked stag that walked from the wood to the water and back again as he watched. Corridors hung with tapestries of the hunt, of the harvest, of 1,000 small woven people going about 1,000 small woven lives, and when Harry stopped to look, the woven people stopped too and turned and looked back at him, and one small woven child lifted one small woven hand. Everywhere the house was waking. He could feel it under his feet, in the warmth coming back into the flagstones, in the sconces that lit themselves ahead of him down the dark passages and put themselves out behind, in the doors that opened at his approach and the stairs that seemed, when he was tired, to be a little shorter than they had been. Dust lifted off a century of stillness and hung gold in the shafts of light and settled, and the elves went before and behind him in a quiet tide, polishing, airing, drawing back curtains that had not been drawn back in 100 years, so that the light came into rooms that had held only the dark, and the rooms, Harry thought, seemed to sit up in it, like sleepers waked gently into a good morning. On the second floor of the oldest wing they passed an open door, and Harry stopped, because the room beyond it was small and low and plainly a child's, with a narrow bed and a painted chest and a rocking horse in the corner with a real mane gone dusty, and a window that looked out over the mere. Someone had been in already and drawn the curtains and beaten the dust from the coverlet and set a jug of the wild roses on the sill. "Whose room is this?" Harry asked, and Barrow was quiet a moment before he answered. "It has been many children's, sir, down the years. It is the heir's room, the eldest child's room, and it has stood empty 100 years. Tibbet made it up this morning before you came on the chance you might see it and might one day want it." He did not press the point. He only stood in the passage and let Harry look his fill at the small waiting bed with the roses on the sill, and then, when Harry was ready, they went on. "It knows you're here," he said to Barrow on a landing, watching a chandelier the size of a small tree kindle itself candle by candle above the stairwell. "The whole house, it's like it's been holding its breath and it just let it out." "It has, sir," said Barrow, "and so have we. A house is only stone until there is a family in it to be a house for. We kept it standing, but you are what makes it a home, and it can feel the difference, and so can we." He paused on the landing, one small hand on the banister, and looked up the stairwell at the waking light. "There is a great deal I must show you, sir, in the days to come. The stores and the wards and the accounts, for the estate is larger than you can yet imagine, and one day all of it will answer to your hand, but those are matters for later and for daylight. Today, before anything else, there are some who have been waiting a very long time to see your face, and I will not keep them waiting an hour longer than I must. Come, sir, come and meet your family." He led Harry up the great stair and along a passage that ran the whole length of the house's oldest wing, and stopped before a set of double doors of dark oak carved with the standing heart, and laid his hand upon them and looked back at Harry. "They will all speak at once," he said, "and some of them are proud and some are stern and one or two are foolish, for we do not stop being ourselves merely because we are paint. But there is not one of them, sir, not one who is not glad past the telling of it that you have come. Remember that, whatever they say, every soul behind these doors has loved a Potter, and every soul behind these doors is yours." And he pushed the doors open, and the long gallery of Hartsmere lay before them, and the whole waiting line of the dead turned in their frames to look at the living child in the doorway. It was the longest room Harry had ever seen, running away into a dimness at the far end where the newest portraits hung, its walls close hung from the wainscot to the high ceiling with frame upon gilded frame, hundreds of them, more, a river of faces going back and back into the beginning of the family, and every face in every frame had turned toward the door. For a moment there was a silence so complete that Harry heard the candle flames breathing. Then a voice from somewhere up near the ceiling said, wonderingly, "Green eyes, do you see it?" "He has the Evans green," and the whole gallery broke at once into a rush of sound, 100 voices speaking together, exclaiming, weeping, calling to one another down the length of the room. "There he is, James's son come home. Look how thin, look how they have starved him. The wards took him, I felt the wards take him. Welcome, child, welcome, welcome," until the noise of it filled the great room to the rafters, generations of Potters leaning from their frames to see him. And Harry stood in the doorway of it, small and overwhelmed, being looked at with love by more people at once than had ever bothered to look at him at all. Enough. The word was not loud, but it carried, and the gallery stilled at once. It had come from a portrait halfway down the room, larger than most, in a heavy frame, and the man in it now leaned forward with both hands on the arms of his painted chair, and fixed the others with a look of fond exasperation. "You will frighten him witless, the lot of you," shrieking like a gallery of gulls. "He is 6 years old, and he has walked into a room full of dead relations who are all howling at once. Give the child room to breathe." He turned his head, and his painted eyes found Harry, and everything in his weathered old face gentled. "There now," he said, "there now. Come down here to me, lad, where we can hear each other, and pay the rest of them no mind. Come and let your old grandfather look at you." He was old in the portrait, 70 or more, with a great deal of white hair swept back from a high forehead, and a short white beard, and a nose that Harry recognized with a small internal jolt, because it was going to be his own nose in 60 years. He wore the deep green robes of an earlier age, and a heavy signet on one finger, and there was a shrewdness in his eyes and a warmth under the shrewdness. And when Harry came and stood before the frame, the old man looked down at him for a long moment without speaking, and his painted eyes grew bright. "Well," he said at last, softly. "Well, hello, Harry." "Hello," Harry said. "How do you know my name?" The old man laughed, a warm, cracked laugh that turned into something else halfway through and had to be swallowed down. "How do I know it, child? I gave it to you, or the half of it, though I never lived to see it given. My name is Henry Potter, and I sat in the Wisengamot for 40 years and made a great many powerful men extremely cross, and in my life everyone who loved me called me Harry. I never set foot in this house but the once, mind, as a grown man. By my day the road was near lost and the valley half a legend. But there is a custom in this family older than the forgetting. When a Potter dies, a portrait of him is sent home to hang in this gallery, and the elves receive it and hang it and keep the dust from it, though no living Potter ever comes to look. So I have hung here 60 years among my fathers, through the ceiling and the silence and the long dark when I thought the line had failed and no one would ever call me anything again. The bright eyes did not blink. And here is the wonder that undid me when I felt you at the gate, lad. Your father James never knew this house, never knew this gallery, never knew there hung in it a portrait of an old man called Harry, and yet he named you Harry. The name came down to him the long way, hand to hand, Fleamont telling him some tale of old grandfather Harry who plagued the Wisengamot, and James liking the sound of it, and never once dreaming that 100 miles away the old man himself was waiting to hear his own name spoken by a living Potter again. And now here you are, and you have my nose and Lily's eyes and my name, and you have come home to me at last, so you will forgive an old man if he needs a moment. Harry put his hand up without thinking and laid it flat against the bottom of the frame, against the cold gilt, over the place where the old man's painted hand rested on the arm of the chair. And Henry Potter looked down at the small hand on his frame and pressed his own painted hand against the inside of the canvas as if he could feel it through, and neither of them said anything for a while, and the long gallery of the Potters was very quiet and let them have it. Now, said Henry at last, briskly, straightening, blinking hard, now, you will have questions, and I will answer them, because a Potter is owed the truth by his own house always, and you have been told precious little truth in your short life, I'll wager. Ask, lad, ask me anything, and I will tell you straight. Why was it hidden? Harry said. Barrow said the family folded it away and went to live somewhere else and forgot. But why? Why would you leave a house like this? Henry's face sobered. Sit, he said, in a chair, a real one, slid itself softly across the floor from the wall and stopped behind Harry's knees, and he sat, and the portrait settled back to tell it. You must understand it was not one choice but the last of a great many. From the very beginning this family kept its deepest magic hidden, because from the very beginning it was a hard and often killing thing to be a wizard in England. Muggles hunted us in the old years, hunted us with fire and with iron, and worse than the Muggles were the wizards who hunted their own, the ambitious ones, the ones who wanted what an old family had and were not above burning a house to get it. And Hartsmere was very old and very rich, not only in gold, lad, though there was gold, but in magic, deep magic, the oldest in the line, kept here at the heart of the house where the family had guarded it for 1,000 years. He glanced, as he said it, toward the dim far end of the gallery, toward the oldest frames, and something passed over his face. So the family always wore two faces, a modest house in the world's eye, and this, the true seat, held close and quiet behind it, and for long ages that was enough. But about 100 years gone in my own long lifetime, the last hard time came, worse than any in living memory, and the family made the last hard choice. They took the true seat, this house, with all its deep magic and all its long memory, and they folded it away entire. They folded the valley shut. They put the great wards down into a sleep so deep that no enemy, no matter how strong, could find or force them, a sleep that would break only for the blood of the line, and only when an heir came in love and need to wake it. And then they went out for good into the ordinary houses, and let the world believe the Potters were a modest family with a modest fortune and nothing worth the burning. And they never came back. A few of us still knew the road at the end, and I was one, near the last of them. I confess I never truly credited the old tale, lad, the golden house in the hidden valley, until I came here once, only once, a grown man in the very season of the sealing, and stood in this gallery among my fathers, and understood at last what we were folding away, and grieved it, and went home, and held my tongue as we all held ours, because the safety of it was in the forgetting. The old eyes were far away, and after me it was lost altogether. Your grandfather Fleamont never knew the road. Your father James was born in an ordinary manor in an ordinary county, and grew up thinking that was the whole of his inheritance, a fine house and a good name and a comfortable fortune, and never once dreamed that his truest home stood empty and waiting 100 miles away, with the lamp still burning in the window and the elves still keeping faith. That is the price the family paid for its safety, lad. Not one of them ever knew what they had given up. Your father died without ever seeing this room. Henry's voice dropped. That is my one grief in all of this, that James never sat where you're sitting. He would have loved it so. Harry looked down at his own hands. Will you tell me about him? He said. About my mum and dad. Nobody ever has. The Dursleys said they died in a car crash, and they were the sort of people you don't ask about. I don't even know what my dad's voice sounded like. For a moment the whole gallery was still, and then a sound went through it, a low murmur, and it was not sorrow exactly, but something like the sound a great many people make when they have all been struck in the same tender place at once. And Henry Potter leaned forward in his frame, and his weathered face was fierce and gentle at once, and he said, "A car crash. They told you a car crash." He shook his white head slowly. Then hear me, Harry Potter, and hear it from your own blood, because you will hear the whole of it in time, and some of it is hard, but you will hear the beginning of it now, and the beginning is this. Your mother and father did not die in any car crash. They died as heroes, defending you, and they were two of the bravest and best and most loved people this family ever produced, and there is not a soul in this gallery who would not give up their frame and their paint and their 100 years of hanging here to have had the honor of standing beside them at the end. And then he told him. He told him carefully, choosing what a child of 6 could carry and setting the rest gently aside for later years, but he told him true, and the gallery helped, voices coming softly from up and down the great room, each one adding a thread. They told him James had been a terror and a delight, that he had flown a toy broomstick into a chandelier at the age of 2, that he had grown up loud and brave and loyal to a fault, that he loved his friends past all sense and would have died for any one of them, and in the end did. They told him Lily had come from outside the family and been better than all of it, that she had a laugh you could find across a crowded room and a temper like a struck match and a kindness so deep it changed people, that she had loved James when he did not deserve her and gone on loving him until he grew into someone who did. They told him that the two of them together had been something rare, a light, that people were drawn to their house the way you are drawn to a warm window on a cold road. They told him last of all and most carefully that a very bad man had come for the three of them one night, and that James had died holding a door so that Lily could run, and that Lily had died standing over Harry's cradle refusing to step aside, and that something in the love of that refusal had turned the bad man's own magic back upon him and saved Harry's life, and that Harry had lived, the only one who lived, and had been the most famous child in their whole world before he was 2 years old. And had then been given to an aunt who told him it was a car crash. Harry sat very still through all of it. He did not cry, though his eyes stung and spilled once and he wiped them without looking away. He was too full to cry. He had spent 6 years being told he was nothing, a burden, a boy no one had wanted, left on a doorstep out of duty. And here in one afternoon he was learning that he had been born into a light and loved past reason and saved by his mother's own body, and that he came from people who died holding doors. It was a great deal to be given at once. He held onto the arms of the chair and let it come into him, and the gallery watched him take it, generations of his own blood watching the last of the line receive, at last, the truth of where he came from. "Thank you," he said at last, in a small clear voice to Henry, to all of them, "for telling me true, even the hard part. I'd rather know the hard part than a nice lie. I've had enough nice lies." Something moved through the gallery at that, a kind of settling and approval, and Henry Potter sat back in his frame and regarded Harry with a long, satisfied look. "There," he said quietly, "there is a Potter, 6 years old, and already he would rather have the truth than the comfort. Your father was just so." He nodded once, a decision made. "You will do, lad, you will do very well. Now," he lifted his voice, "enough of grief for one afternoon. He has family to meet, and there are 2 at the end of this room who will have my hide, paint, and canvas both, if I keep them from him another minute. Barrow, take him down to the old ones, take him to Ireland." Barrow led Harry down the length of the gallery, past frame after frame, and the faces changed as they went. The robes grew stranger and older, the paint darker and stiffer, the eyes in the portraits deeper and stranger, until near the very end the frames were no longer paintings quite as Harry understood paintings, but something older. Figures worked in dim gold and deep color on wood gone black with age, and the air down here was different, cooler, weightier. And the murmuring of the younger portraits fell away behind them into a hush. 2 frames hung side by side at the end of the room, larger than all the rest, and the man and woman in them were very old in the making, though not old in the face, painted in the strong dark style of a lost age, and they had been watching Harry come the whole length of the gallery without a word. The man was broad and bearded and stern, a warrior's stillness in him, one hand resting on the pommel of a sword. But it was the woman Harry could not look away from. She was tall and pale and dark-haired, robed in gray and deep green, and there was a quality to her stillness that was not the stillness of paint but the stillness of deep water, and her eyes, when they rested on him, seemed to go down and down. "So," she said, her voice was low and clear and came from very far away, "the blood comes home. I felt you at the gate, child. I have felt every heir who ever stood at that gate, waking or sleeping, for 1,000 years, and I tell you I had begun to think I would feel no more of them, and the deep magic would go down into the dark unclaimed, and all our long keeping would come to nothing." She leaned forward, and the whole gallery seemed to lean with her. "I am Ireland of the Peverils, who married Hardwin Potter, who stands beside me, and brought my father's inheritance under this roof. And you, small one, are the far end of a very long thread, and I have a great deal to teach you in the years to come that no one else in this house can teach, not the steward, good as he is, not even old Henry with all his cleverness. For the magic that sleeps at the heart of Heartsmere is my magic, the Peveril magic, the deepest wards and the oldest, and they will answer in the end to no hand but the true heirs, and you are he." Her dark eyes held him, and there was iron in them, and under the iron something that was almost tenderness, fierce and cold and old as the mere. You do not understand a word of what I am telling you, and that is well. You are a child, and you should be a child, and eat Tibbet's puddings, and grow strong, and learn your letters, and be loved. But mark this one thing, heir of Hartsmere, and carry it with you even into that cold house where you must sleep. The wards of this place are not stone, and they are not spell-work, whatever the goblins in the ministry may think. They are love made permanent. They are 1,000 years of potters loving this valley and each other and their own, poured into the ground and the stone until the ground and the stone learned how to love back. And love, child, once it has been made that strong and kept that long, cannot be broken by any force in the world. It can only be surrendered or betrayed from within. Remember it. There will come a day you need to know it, and I will not always be able to say it plainly. Beside her, Hardwin Potter inclined his bearded head once, grave as the stone heart at the head of the stair, and said only in a voice like a door closing on a deep room, "Welcome, grandson. The house is yours." Hold it well, and said no more, and somehow the fewness of his words was its own kind of welcome, weightier than all the shrieking down the gallery had been. And beyond them, in the very last and dimmest frame in the corner where the light barely reached, something stirred. It was the oldest thing in the room, so old it was hardly a portrait at all, only a suggestion of a figure in faded gold, a bearded old man in a healer's plain robe with his hands folded in his lap and his eyes closed in sleep. But as Harry looked at it, the eyes opened, and they were kind, unbearably kind, the kindest eyes Harry had ever met, and the ancient figure did not speak aloud, but Harry felt words come into him from it, slow and warm and dim like sunlight through deep water. "Little one, first of my blood I have seen in an age of the world, be well, be kind." The line goes on. And then the eyes closed again, and the figure was only faded gold once more, and Barrow beside him let out a breath he seemed to have been holding. "That is Linfred, sir," the old elf said, very low, and there was awe in his worn voice. "Linfred of Stinchcombe, the first of the potters, the potterer who healed the sick when there were no other healers and gave the family its name. He does not wake for anyone, sir. In 100 years I have seen him open his eyes twice, and both times it was for a potter, and the second time was just now for you. Whatever else you take from this room today, take that. The oldest of your blood woke to bless you. That is weight, sir. That is more weight than I can say." Harry looked back once at the faded golden figure with its folded hands and its closed eyes, and then up at Iland's deep dark gaze, and at Hardwin's bearded stillness, and at all the long river of faces running back up the gallery toward the door in the light, and he understood that he was standing at the end of something enormous, a thread 1,000 years long, and that the whole weight of it had come down now to him, a thin 6-year-old in a shirt gone soft with washing. And that instead of crushing him, the weight of it held him up, the way water holds up a swimmer, the way the wards had held him at the gate. He was not nothing, he had never been nothing, he had only been kept from knowing it. They did not stay much longer that day. Iland said the child had been given enough to hold and should go and be fed, and no one argued with Iland, and Henry called out as they left that Harry was to come back tomorrow, and every day he could, and that there was a great deal an old Wisengamot man could teach a boy about the world he was going to inherit. And the whole gallery called their goodbyes after him down the long room, warm and overlapping, and the doors closed on the sound of it, and Harry carried it with him, that sound. The sound of 100 voices welcoming him into the world. Barrow took him back down to the great hall, where Tibbet was waiting with a tea that could have fed the whole of Privet Drive, and while Harry ate, the old steward sat with him and gently began the other lesson, the one about the inheritance, because a potter, Barrow said, must know what he holds even before he is old enough to hold it. He did not show Harry gold that day. He showed him a book instead, a great leather ledger, one of many, and opened it on the table, and Harry saw columns and columns of a beautiful old hand, and did not understand most of it, but understood this: that the house had kept accounts all through the 100 years of everything, the stores and the stock and the lands and the vaults far away in the Wizard's Bank, and that nothing had been touched, nothing spent, everything kept and tended and grown against the day an heir would come, so that the child who had owned one broken tin soldier was, it turned out, one of the wealthiest children in magical Britain, and had been the whole time he was counting rashers of bacon that were not his. Harry looked at the columns of numbers for a while, and then he pushed the ledger gently away, and Barrow watched him do it with a curious expression. "You do not want to see the sum, sir?" the old elf asked. "Most would. Most men, shown what you have just been shown, can think of nothing else for a week." "It's just numbers," Harry said. "I can't even read most of them yet." He looked up. "I'd rather learn everyone's names, all the elves. I only know you and Tibbet and Corin and Hessa in the tower. There's loads of them, and they all came out to meet me, and I don't know what to call them, and it's rude." He frowned, considering. "And I want to know about the flowers on Mella's briar, whether they'll spread, and whether the harpsichord in the music room is shy or just out of practice, and whether the little woven boy in the tapestry has a name. That stuff, the numbers can wait till I can read them." Barrow was quiet for a moment. Then he reached across the table and very carefully closed the great ledger and set it aside, and there was something in his old face that had not been there before, a kind of settling, the look of a servant who has just learned something good about the master he has been given and did not dare to hope for. "Their names, sir," he said. "You shall have every one of them, and their stories besides, for they are all of them worth knowing. The harpsichord is shy, it will play for you when it trusts you and not before, and you must not rush it. The briar will spread in time, and that is right and good. And the little woven boy in the hunt tapestry is called Wat, and he has been in that field for 600 years, and he will be very pleased that you asked, for no one has asked in longer than I have been alive." He rose and bowed, and his voice was not quite steady. "You are going to be a fine master of this house, Master Harry. I have served 3 generations of your family and buried the road behind 2 of them, and I say it to your face, and I mean it in my bones. Now finish your tea, sir. There is one more thing I would show you before you go, and it is the best thing, and I have been saving it." He took Harry to a room Harry had not seen, a smaller room than the great hall, warm and low-ceilinged and lined with books, with deep chairs and a wide window looking down over the terraces to the mere, and at the end of it a hearth, cold, swept clean, its stone carved all over with the standing heart, and with words in the old tongue Harry could not read. It was not the largest hearth in the house, nor the grandest. But there was something about it, a waiting quality, a held quiet, and Harry crossed to it without being told and stood before the cold grate and felt the mark in his palm warm against his skin. "This is the hearth, sir," Barrow said from the doorway, and he did not come further in, as if the room asked a certain distance of anyone who was not the heir. "The oldest fire in Hartsmere. It was lit, they say, by Linford's own hand, from a coal he carried out of the house where he was born, and it burned without going out for 800 years, tended day and night, father to son, the whole life of the family gathered around it. And when the house was sealed and the family went out into the world, this fire, and only this fire, was let go cold, because it will light for no hand but a potter's, and they would not leave it burning where a stranger might warm himself at it. It has been cold for 100 years, sir, cold since the day the road was buried, and it will stay cold until a potter kindles it again of his own will with his own magic, and when he does, the household will know that Hartsmere is truly awake and truly held and has a master again in deed and not only in name." He looked at Harry across the warm, dim room. "No one can do it for you, sir. Not I, not Tibbet, not all the elves of the house together, not the portraits, only you. And there is no shame if it will not come today, for you are young and untaught, and the fire is very old and very proud. But I thought, sir, that you should be the one to try, whenever you are ready, or not at all today if you would rather. It has waited 100 years, it can wait a little more." Harry stood before the cold hearth and looked at the carved heart and the words he could not read, and he thought about all of it, about Mella walking 6 years, about the light in the window, about James holding a door and Lily standing over his cradle, about 100 voices that had called out all together that he was theirs, about the deep magic that was love made permanent, and he found that he wanted, more than he had ever wanted anything, to light this fire. To give something back to the house that had given him everything in the space of a week. He did not know how, no one had taught him. But he put out his marked hand toward the cold grate, and he shut his eyes, and instead of trying to do magic, which he did not know how to do, he simply thought, with the whole warm full weight of everything he had learned that day, about being home, about being wanted, about a family that had kept a light burning for 100 years against his coming in the dark. He thought about warmth and about giving it back, and he felt the mark in his palm grow hot, hotter than it had ever been, and he felt something answer it, deep down under the house, something enormous and patient turning toward him, and he opened his hand toward the grate and let the warmth in his chest pour down his arm and out through his palm as he had seen Mella pour her light into the earth. The hearth of Hartsmere caught. It did not catch the way an ordinary fire catches. There was no kindling, no wood, no coal. There was simply a sound, low, a great soft sigh out of the ancient stone, and then light bloomed in the cold grate, gold and green and shot through with white, a fire out of nothing, out of memory, out of 100 years of waiting. And it rose up gentle and steady and warm and filled the hearth and threw its light across the low warm room and across Harry's astonished face. And the carved heart in the stone seemed to lift its head in the moving light, and the words in the old tongue glowed once all along the mantel. Harry felt, through the mark and through the floor and through the whole vast waking body of the house, a shock of pure gladness go out from the hearth to the furthest wing in the highest tower and the deepest cellar. The house crying out wordless in every stone at once, "He has lit the fire, he has lit the fire, the heir has come and he has lit the fire." And far off across the valley the stopped clock in the west tower gave a deep iron groan in its great hands, still for 100 years, shuddered and moved, and began slowly to keep the hour again. Behind him in the doorway, old Barrow had sunk to his knees on the threshold with his hands pressed over his face, and his shoulders shook, and for once it was not from loss. Harry watched the impossible fire burn, warm on his face, and he was 6 years old, and he had just done a thing that not one adult wizard in 10,000 could have done, woken the oldest fire in one of the oldest houses in magical Britain with nothing but a marked hand and a full heart, and it did not feel like triumph, and it did not feel like power. He felt standing there in the light he had made, simply and completely at home, in a way the word had never once meant before, and he turned to old Barrow kneeling in the doorway and said, in a voice gone soft and small, "It's warm. I made it and it's warm. Can we keep it lit now forever so it never has to go cold again?" "Yes, sir," said Barrow from behind his hands. "Oh, yes, sir, forever, I promise you, never again." Far away in the deep stone vaults beneath a marble bank in the heart of London, a very old ledger that had lain closed and silent for 100 years stirred upon its shelf. A line of ink that had been dead and dry since before the goblin who tended that vault was born flushed, suddenly, a living gold, and a single word wrote itself in the margin in a hand no living creature had made, and the word was awake. And the goblin whose name was Gorbrand, and who had inherited the dead and dusty and profitless Potter accounts from his father as his father had inherited them from his, and who had long since ceased to expect anything of them at all, came down the long stair with his lamp to see what had disturbed the silence of the oldest vaults, and stopped and lifted the lamp and read the living word in the margin of the ancient ledger, and stood for a long moment very still. Then he turned and went back up the stair, faster than he had come down, because a Potter had lit a fire that had been cold for 100 years, and the deep magic of the oldest wards in England had woken and told the bank of it, and that was not a small thing, that was a thing the director himself would want to know before the night was out, and there were, Gorbrand thought grimly, climbing, a great many other parties who would want to know it too, and not all of them friends. Chapter 3 and Chapter 4. The ledger and the trace. The director of vaults received Gorbrand at the top of the deep stair a little after midnight, which was the hour goblins prefer for business that matters, and he did not offer the account keeper a seat, because the news Gorbrand carried was the kind that is better delivered standing. "Say it plainly," said Ragnarok. He was old even for a goblin, his face folded like a walnut and his eyes the flat black of a bird's, and he had run the vaults of Gringotts for 200 years and had heard in that time nearly everything. "You do not come up from the 9th level at midnight for a rounding error." Gorbrand set the ancient ledger on the director's table and opened it to the page that had written itself, and turned it so the black eyes could read the single living word in the margin. "The Potter accounts," he said. "The old ones, the dead ones, they woke tonight. This wrote itself at the 11th hour in a hand no living clerk set down, and when I went to the deep shelf to see what had disturbed it, the whole tier of Potter vaults was warm to the touch. The 7th that has not been opened since the last war, the oldest that has not been opened in my lifetime nor my father's. The wards on all of them have changed their note." He paused. "The estate has an heir director. A living Potter has touched the deep magic, and the deep magic has told the bank, as the old contract binds it to do. There is no other reading." Ragnarok looked at the word for a long moment, awake. Then he sat slowly in the high chair behind the table and folded his long fingers together and was quiet in the way that made younger goblins nervous, and that Gorbrand, who was not young, simply waited out. "The Potter boy," the director said at last. "The one they hid, the famous one. There's only the one Potter left living, director. It can be no other. He would be 6 years old. 6, or near it. A child of 6, said Ragnarok, has woken wards that 3 generations of grown Potters never so much as suspected they owned." He tapped one clawed finger once against the table. "Do you understand what that means, Gorbrand, or must I say it? It means the deep magic accepted him. Not the shallow spellwork any hedge wizard can lay and any curse breaker can peel. The deep magic, the Peveril wards, the oldest bound estate on our books, sworn to this bank by contract before there was a ministry to interfere, and it has chosen a starved and hidden child, and it has told us so at midnight in a hand that has been dust for a century." He let that sit. "That is not a rounding error. That is the largest thing to happen in the dormant tiers in 200 years, and I have been keeping those tiers for all 200 of them. There is more, director, and it is the part I like least." Gorbrand's voice did not change. Goblins do not waste tone. "The reactivation of a bound estate is not a quiet thing. It sends out a note. We heard it because we are bound to hear it by the contract, but we are not the only instrument in Britain tuned to that note. The ministry keeps its own register of dormant estates in the Department of Magical Estates, in the office that watches for houses whose lines have failed, so that it may claim them. If our shelf lit up tonight, director, then so did theirs, and there is a man in that office who has been watching the Potter estate for a very long time." Ragnarok's black eyes came up. "Name, Ambrose Kroll, Deputy Escheator. He has filed 3 separate petitions over the years to have the Potter seat surveyed as a lapsed estate, on the grounds that the heir's whereabouts are unknown and the line effectively extinguished. We refused each one, as the contract requires us to refuse, because our records showed the accounts dormant but not dead, and a dormant account with a living contingent heir cannot be escheated while we hold it. But the accounts were dormant, director. They gave him nothing to fear and us nothing to fight for. Now they are awake, and the moment they woke, they became worth more than anything else on our dormant shelf, and Kroll will know it by morning, and Kroll has waited a very long time." Gorbrand closed the ledger. "He cannot touch what is inside our walls, but the estate is not inside our walls." The manor sits out in the world with a 6-year-old heir and a household of elves and 100 years of neglected wards, and a patient man with the ministry's seal in his pocket, and I do not think he will wait to be introduced. For a while the director of vaults said nothing, and the great stone office was silent but for the far, deep sounds of the bank at night, the creak of the security beasts turning in their pits, the whisper of the underground river. Then Ragnarok stood. "We are bound to that estate by an oath older than the ministry that would rob it," he said. "Our honor is in it, and so, let us not pretend otherwise, is a great deal of our business, for a potter awake and grateful is worth 100 years of a potter asleep. We will not move for the ministry's convenience, and we will not move for Kroll's. We will move for the contract, and the contract says the heir must be brought in, tested, confirmed, and his estate secured under our seal, before any other party can lay a claim to so much as a doorknob. Send word to the manor, formally, the old way, invite the heir to present himself at the bank to confirm his blood and take up his inheritance at his earliest convenience under the protection of Gringotts for the journey." His folded face creased further, and Gorbrand. "Make his earliest convenience very early. The clock that Kroll watches has already started. Far to the south and west of London, in a valley the ministry's maps did not show, the heir of the Potters was learning the names of his household, and had no notion that a clock had started anywhere. He had made it his project. There were, it turned out, 31 elves at Hartsmere, and Harry had decided that he would know every one of them by name and by story before the summer was out, and he went at it with the patient thoroughness of a child who has finally been given something worth being thorough about. He learned that Tibbet ran the kitchens and had a sister, Dilly, who ran the still room and made the cordials, and that the two of them had not spoken directly in 40 years over a disagreement about the correct way to candy a violet, and communicated entirely through a long-suffering third elf named Pot. He learned that Corin, who was young, only 90, was the first elf born at Hartsmere in a century, born into the sleep and the silence, and had spent his whole life polishing silver for a family that never came, and that the day Harry lit the heart hearth was the first day of Corin's life that had ever had a point to it, which was why Corin now followed Harry through the house at a distance of exactly 6 feet, and would have walked into the mere backward if Harry had asked him to. He learned that Hessa, who kept the lamp in the west tower, was the oldest elf in the house after Barrow, and had a memory like a deep well, and could tell him the name and the story of every Potter in the long gallery if he brought her a cup of the black tea she liked and sat still to listen. And he learned, gently over those first weeks, to undo a thing the elves did that troubled him, which was that they would not sit in his presence, and would not eat while he ate, and flinched, the older ones, when he thanked them, as if thanks were a thing that might be taken back and paid for later. "Why won't you sit down?" he asked Tibbet the third or fourth time when she had brought him a supper by the heart hearth and stood by the wall with her hands folded to watch him eat it. "There's a whole chair right there. You've been on your feet since before I got here. Sit down and have some, there's loads." "It would not be proper, sir," said Tibbet, scandalized. "An elf does not sit at the master's table, an elf does not eat the master's food." "But I don't want to eat by myself," Harry said, and it was the plain truth, and it landed harder than any argument could have, because Tibbet had spent 100 years in an empty house and knew, better than most, what it was to eat by yourself. Harry saw it land. He pressed gently. "Mella said you're my family. She said that right at the start, that you're not servants really, you're family, and she made me promise to let you love me the way you wanted to. And in my family at Privet Drive, I always had to eat standing up in the corner while they sat at the table, and it was horrible. It was the loneliest part of the whole day, and I hated it, and I'm not doing it here. So either you sit down and eat with me, or I stand up in the corner with you, but I'm not sitting at this table on my own like an Uncle Vernon." He pulled out the chair. "Please, Tibbet, it's not an order. I'd never order you. It's just I've been lonely my whole life, and I don't want to be lonely in my own house." Tibbet looked at the pulled-out chair and at the thin child holding it, and her round face worked, and after a long moment she came, stiff with 100 years of propriety, and perched on the very edge of the chair as though it might bite her, and let Harry put a warm roll on a plate in front of her. And she did not eat it, not that night, but she sat, and it was a beginning, and by the end of the month there were elves at Harry's table every evening, sitting properly on the chairs, eating properly off the plates, and the great hall of Hartsmere rang at supper time with a sound it had not made in 100 years, which was the sound of a family at a meal, and Barrow stood in the doorway and watched it and did not say what it did to him, because there were no words in any of his languages that were big enough. His lessons went on alongside the names. Henry Potter, from his frame, taught him the shape of the world he had been born into and kept from, the ministry and its offices, the great families and their old feuds, the school he would go to one day where the letters would come when he was 11, the long, slow currents of wizarding history. Ilanth taught him something harder to describe, taught him to be still, to close his eyes and feel the wards of the house lying all around him like a second skin, to know without looking when a door opened 3 rooms away or a bird landed on the terrace, because a lord of a warded house, she said, must learn to feel his walls before he can ever learn to raise them. And the house itself taught him constantly in 1,000 small ways, offering him the right book from the library shelf before he had finished forming the question, warming the flagstones under his feet on the cold mornings, and once when he skinned his knee on the terrace stair, guiding his hand without his knowing it to a particular herb in the overgrown physic garden that stopped the sting at a touch, Linfred's own herb, the sleeping healer reaching out across 800 years to tend a scraped knee. The lessons with Ireland were the strangest, and in a quiet way, the ones he came to love best. She would have him sit on the cold floor of the long gallery beneath her frame with his eyes shut, and she would say nothing for long stretches, only wait, until the fidget went out of him and something older and stiller took its place, and then her low far voice would come down to him out of the dark of his own closed eyes. The east door of the music room stands open. Feel it, do not look. Where the house draws breath through it. And at first he felt nothing, and then one afternoon in the third week he felt it, a coolness, a place where the warm body of the house opened to the air, 3 rooms away and 1 floor down, as plain to the new sense she was growing in him as a draft on the back of the neck. There, said Ireland, and there was iron satisfaction in it. You felt it, say nothing, do not be pleased with yourself, that spoils it, feel the next thing, there is a bird on the west sill. Find it, and he found it, the small warm weight of it against the great cool stone, and he sat on the gallery floor with his eyes shut and felt his house lying all around him for the first time as a thing he was inside of and part of. And Ireland watched him do it with her deep dark eyes and did not smile, because she never smiled, but something in her stillness eased. And that same evening, passing the music room, Harry heard the harpsichord play, not 3 shy notes in silence this time, but a whole slow phrase, hesitant, old, offered, the shy instrument deciding at last to trust him. And he stopped in the doorway and listened to the whole of it and said thank you to the empty room when it was done, and the harpsichord played 3 quick bright notes back at him that were unmistakably pleased. He grew in those weeks. Tibbet's cooking put flesh on him and color in his face, and the marvel of the place put something in him that had never had room to grow at Privet Drive, a steadiness, a settledness, the particular unhurried confidence of a child who knows, all the way down, that he is loved and that there is a place in the world that is his. He did not become loud, he did not swagger. He became simply more himself, more of the gentle, clever, watchful person he had always been under the flinching, once the old weight had been lifted off him like a lid. But he was 6, and the world outside the valley did not stop for him to grow, and one evening late in August, Barrow asked him to come to the steward's small office off the great hall, and there was a gravity in the asking, and when Harry came in he found not only Barrow but the whole council of the house waiting for him. In a way, the old steward at his table and Hesse beside him, and the portraits of Henry and Ireland carried down and propped against the wall so they could take part. And Harry understood that the warm, easy part of the summer had reached the edge of something. Sit, sir, said Barrow. There is a hard matter, and you are the heir, and though you are young you must hear it, because it concerns your safety, and I will not decide it over your head. He folded his hands. You know that the seeming we keep over the other house hides your comings and goings from the Dursleys. What I have not told you, because I did not wish to frighten you before I had to, is that the Dursleys are not the only ones watching that house. When your parents died and you were given to your aunt, a very powerful wizard laid protections upon you there, blood magic, tied to the fact that your mother's sister took you in, and that magic guards you, and it is real, and it is not to be lightly thrown away, but it is watched, sir. The wizard who laid it keeps a kind of watch upon it, to know that it holds, and there are others besides, and if you were to vanish from that house entirely, the watch would notice, and questions would be asked that we are not yet strong enough to answer. So I have to keep going back, Harry said. You told me that already. I don't mind. Well, I mind, but I understand it. That is not the new part, sir. Barrow's old eyes were steady. The new part is this. When you lit the hearth and the great wards of Hartsmere woke to their full strength, the house did a thing it could not help doing, a thing that is in its very nature. It announced itself. A bound estate coming awake sends out a call, sir, the way a struck bell sends out a note, and that note went out across the whole of magical Britain 3 weeks ago, and it was heard. He let the words settle. It was heard by friends, we hope. It was certainly heard by the goblins, for we have had word from them, and I will come to that, and it is good word mostly. But it will also have been heard, sir, by the ministry, which keeps instruments precisely to hear such things, and there are men in the ministry whose whole office is to find estates whose families have died out, and to take them for the government. And Hartsmere has looked for 100 years exactly like such an estate. A great house, a failed line, a fortune with no one to claim it. There will be men who have had their eye on this valley for years, sir, waiting, and 3 weeks ago we rang a bell and told every one of them that the waiting was over. Harry was quiet. Out the small window the last light was going off the mere, and the water had turned to pewter, and a single early star hung over the western hills where Hesse's lamp would soon be lit. They can't have it, he said at last, and there was no heat in it, only a flat 6-year-old certainty. It's not an empty house, it's my house. There's 31 elves and 100 portraits and Mella's Briar and me. It's not empty and they can't have it. "No, sir," said Iolanthe from her frame against the wall, and her deep voice filled the little room. "They cannot, not while the heir lives and the deep wards hold. But law is a kind of magic too, child, a shallow and grasping kind, and grasping men can do a great deal of harm with it before the deep magic ever comes into the question. They cannot take the heart of this house. But they can make your life very difficult indeed, and they can try to take you, which comes to the same thing, for a house without its heir is only stone. We must be ahead of them. And to be ahead of them, we must do the thing the goblins have asked, and we must do it soon." That was when Barrow told him about the goblins, and about Gringotts, and about the letter. It had come 3 days before, he said, brought not by owl but the old way, appearing folded and sealed upon the steward's table in the grey dawn with a smell of iron and cold stone about it, and Barrow drew it out now and laid it before Harry. Heavy parchment, black ink in a spiked upright hand, and a seal pressed into wax the dark red of old blood, the crossed key and sword of Gringotts. Harry could not read all of it. But Barrow read it to him, and it was very formal and very old-fashioned, and under the formality it said a simple thing. The bank knew the estate had woken. The bank was bound to that estate by an oath older than the ministry. And the bank invited the heir, Harry James Potter, to present himself at Gringotts at his earliest convenience, under the bank's own protection for the journey, so that his blood might be confirmed and his inheritance secured under the bank's seal, beyond the reach of any other claim. "Is it a trick?" Harry asked. He had learned at Privet Drive that when someone powerful suddenly wanted to help you, it was usually a trick or a trap or a chore in disguise. "Do they want something?" "People always want something. They want a great deal, sir," said Barrow, and there was unexpectedly the ghost of dry humor in it. "The goblins always want a great deal. They want the Potter accounts to stay with Gringotts and to grow, for you awake and prosperous are worth a fortune to them, and you asleep are worth nothing. They want the honor of their old oath kept, for a goblin's oath is not a small thing to a goblin, whatever wizards say of them. And they want, I think, to be first ahead of the ministry, because there is no creature alive that relishes beating the ministry to a prize more than a goblin does. But, sir, hear the important thing. What the goblins want and what you need happen this once to be the very same thing. They want your estate secured under their seal before the ministry can move. So do you. When wants line up like that, sir, you do not call it a trick. You call it an alliance, and you are courteous, and you keep your wits, and you do the deal." He paused. "And there is this, which I will say once and plainly. In all my long life I have known the goblins to be hard and proud and greedy and grasping, and I have never once known them to break a sworn word. The ministry breaks its word before breakfast. The goblins do not break theirs at all. If Gringotts sets its seal on your inheritance, sir, and swears to defend it, then it is defended, and there is no safer promise to be had in all of Britain. I would sooner trust a goblin's oath than a minister's smile any day of any year." Harry looked at the letter, at the spiked black hand and the blood-dark seal, and thought about it in the serious, careful way he thought about everything, and then he looked up. "Then we should go," he said, "before the grasping men do their law magic. We should go and get it sealed." "Yes, sir," said Barrow, "I believe we should, and soon." In an office on the 4th floor of the Ministry of Magic at that same hour, a grey man sat alone at a grey desk and looked at a small brass instrument that had begun, 3 weeks before, to do something it had not done in the 11 years he had owned it. The instrument was old and ugly and precious, one of only a handful ever made, and it hung on the wall of the Office of Reversions and Escheats like a barometer, a ring of dormant states rendered as a ring of small dark glass beads, each bead a great house whose line had failed or faltered, each dark and cold and waiting to fall, in the fullness of time and the slow turning of the law, into the hands of the ministry, which is to say into the hands of the men whose office it was to catch them when they fell. Ambrose Kroll had watched that instrument for 11 years. He had made himself the foremost authority in Britain on the dying houses, on the exact and intricate law by which a great estate, when its family guttered out, reverted to the crown of the magical realm, and he had done it patiently and thanklessly and without ever once being thanked, because escheat is slow work, the slow harvesting of the dead, and a man who does it well is a man no one wishes to sit next to at dinner. He did not mind. Ambrose Kroll had made his peace long ago with being the sort of man no one wished to sit next to. He had other consolations, and chief among them, the private hoard at the center of his careful grey life, the thing he had never told a living soul, was a single bead on that instrument, high on the ring, that he had watched longer and more hungrily than all the rest together. The Potter bead, the oldest bead on the wheel. The great lost estate that the histories half remembered and the maps had forgotten, the sealed and sleeping Potter seat that no one alive had ever found, whose very existence most of his colleagues doubted, a legend, a rumor, a golden house in a hidden valley. Kroll did not doubt it. Kroll had spent 11 years assembling the proof of it, thread by patient thread, out of old land rolls and older wills and the marginalia of dead clerks, and he knew, with the cold certainty of a man who has done the arithmetic himself, 3 times over in the dark, that the Potter estate was real and vast, and that it had been sitting there sealed and heirless and ripe for the taking for 100 years, wanting only that the last of the direct line should die without a claim for it to fall at last. whole and unimaginable, into the escheat, into the office, into the patient gray hands that had been waiting for it longer than the child who now threatened it had been alive. He had been so close. The last Potters had died in the war. The child had vanished, hidden, unfindable, uncounted. And every year the child stayed hidden and unclaimed was a year the clock ran toward the day the estate could be declared derelict and its contingent heir presumed lost, and Kroll had nursed that clock, had quietly over the years made certain that no inconvenient question about the Potter heir's whereabouts ever quite got answered, had smoothed and delayed and misfiled with the patient artistry of a man tending a slow fire, waiting for it to burn down to the moment he could rake in the whole estate under his own hand. 3 more years, he had calculated it to within a season. 3 more years of the child staying lost, and the greatest prize in the history of his office would have been his to harvest. And 3 weeks ago in the night, the Potter bead on the instrument had woken. It had gone from dead black to a deep, live, pulsing gold, the only gold bead on the whole dark wheel, and it burned there now on his wall like a small furious sun. And Ambrose Kroll had sat before it for 3 weeks with the whole architecture of 11 patient years collapsing quietly around him, and had not raged because raging was not in his nature, and had instead done what he always did, which was arithmetic. A woken estate had an heir. An heir with living blood in a woken ward could not be escheated, not by any clean reading of the law. The clock he had nursed for 11 years had not merely stopped, it had run backward all the way back to nothing, unless, Kroll was a connoisseur of the word unless the heir could be shown to be no true heir. Unless the estate could be declared unsafe, its wards dangerous, its occupation a hazard to the realm, and taken into protective ministry stewardship pending a survey, which was a thing his office had the power to do, on his own signature, in the case of a dormant estate whose sudden activation posed an unassessed risk. Unless he moved quickly before the goblins, who he did not doubt had heard the same bell he had, could get their seal upon it, because once Gringotts sealed an inheritance, the ministry's own courts would tie themselves in knots for a decade before they would overrule it. Unless the heir, whoever and wherever he was, could be reached and assessed and found wanting, before anyone official had confirmed he was found at all. Ambrose Kroll reached across his gray desk and drew toward him a clean sheet of parchment and dipped his pen and began, in a small, precise hand, to write an order for the protective survey of a dormant estate posing an unassessed magical hazard to the public. He left the space for the estate's location blank for now, because he did not yet know where the valley was, but he knew who would. A woken ward is a loud thing to the right instrument, and Ambrose Kroll had spent 11 years learning to listen, and he had, besides, on a slip of paper in a locked drawer, the name of a man who found things that did not wish to be found, and unmade wards that were never meant to come down, and asked no questions that were not strictly professional, so long as the fee was paid in advance and in gold. He finished the order and blotted it and set it in the tray for the morning, and then he sat a while longer in the dark of his gray office, watching the one gold bead burn on the wheel of the dying houses, and he did not smile because Ambrose Kroll was not a man who smiled, but something moved behind his flat gray eyes that was worse than a smile. The still, cold patience of a man who has waited 11 years and does not, in the end, intend to be cheated of his harvest by a child. The man whose name was on the slip of paper kept no office and no fixed address, and Kroll found him 2 nights later, where the note said he might be found, in the back room of a house near the river that did no trade any respectable person would name. He was a big man and quiet, with a cursebreaker's scarred hands and a face that had been burned once long ago down one side, by something that leaves a mark no healer will lift, and he sat with his back to the wall and his eyes on the door, and he did not rise when Kroll came in, and he did not offer his name because Kroll already had it. Dreng. He had worked the tombs of the south and the barrows of the north, had taken down wards that had killed better men, had left the great banks and the great expeditions years ago when it was made clear to him that his methods, while effective, could not be written into a report, and he now sold those methods privately to men with gray faces and full purses and business that would not bear the light. An old estate, said Kroll, when the gold had been counted onto the table and swept away. Sealed. Very old, very deep, dormant 100 years and lately woken. I will have the location within the week. He did not sit, Ambrose Kroll did not sit in rooms like this. The outer wards will be strong in design and weak in maintenance, a century untended. I want them opened quietly, and I want the house made accessible to a ministry survey party, and I want it done before a certain other interested institution can put its seal upon the place. The occupant is a minor child in a household of domestic elves. I do not anticipate that troubling a man of your experience. Dreng looked at him for a while with his good eye and his ruined one, and then he said in a voice like gravel going down a chute, "Deep wards don't sleep as light as shallow ones. 100 years untended, the outer skins peel easy enough, I'll grant you, but in a state that deep has a heart to it, and the heart doesn't peel. The heart you take a different way, or you don't take it at all." He turned a scarred coin over across his knuckles once and back. I'll open your outer wards, I'll get your survey party onto the grounds. What happens when you reach the heart of an old house that's just decided it's awake again? That's not a curse breaker's problem, that's yours. I break in, I don't hold what's inside. He pocketed the coin. You'll have the rest of my fee ready the day you have the location, and Mr. Kroll. The good eye did not blink. Old houses that wake up after 100 years didn't wake up for no reason. Somebody fed them something. Mind you're not the something they feed on. Kroll said nothing to that. He inclined his gray head once and went out into the night, and the arrangement was made, and neither man wasted a word on farewell. At Hartsmere the household made its preparations, and they were careful ones. Barrow would not simply pop the heir into the middle of a wizarding bank. There were forms to observe and dangers to weigh, and a disguise to arrange, for a famous scar on a famous forehead could not be allowed to walk openly through Diagon Alley. It was decided that they would go in 3 days' time at the bank's opening, when the alley was least crowded. That Corin, who was quick and devoted and had begged for the honor until Barrow relented, would attend Harry as his personal elf. That Harry would go hooded and glamoured as an ordinary well-off wizarding child. And that Barrow himself, who had not left the valley in a century and whose old legs ached at the thought, would go all the same, because he would not send his heir into the world for the first time in the keeping of anyone but himself. There was a great deal to arrange, and Barrow arranged it the way he did everything, thoroughly, with lists. Corin was fitted with a proper traveling livery and practiced, over and over, the small elf magic that would carry the three of them from the valley to a quiet corner of Diagon Alley and back, until he could do it in his sleep, which he very nearly did, being too keyed up to sleep much at all. Hessa found in a cedar chest in the tower a child's traveling cloak of deep green wool with a deep hood, 100 years out of fashion and so well made it had not aged a day, and altered it to Harry's size with a few passes of her fingers, and it was decided the hood and a light glamour on his brow would be disguise enough for an ordinary morning. Arrow drilled Harry gently but without letting up on how to conduct himself, because a potter walking into Gringotts was walking onto a stage, and every goblin in the place would be watching the last of an ancient line to see what he was made of. You will be courteous, sir, but you will not fawn. You will be grateful for the oath they keep, but you will not be surprised by it, for it is your due. You will look them in the eye, sir, always, for a goblin reads a great deal in whether a man will meet his eye. And when they name a thing hard or ancient or costly, you will not flinch, because you are the lord of a house that is harder and more ancient and more costly than anything they will show you, and the wards of that house have already called you their own. He had looked at Harry very steadily. You are sick, sir, and I would spare you all of it if I could, but you are also the heir of Hartsmere, and tomorrow you must be seen to be. Can you be both at once, do you think, a child and a lord? I've been pretending to be things I'm not my whole life, Harry had said. This is the first time I'll be pretending to be something I actually am. That's easier. That's loads easier. And Barrow had had to turn away at that and busy himself with his lists, and had not trusted his voice again for some little while. On the last evening before they went, Harry climbed the west tower to sit a while with Hessa and her lamp, as he had taken to doing, and he looked out from the high window over the dark valley and the pewter mere and the great house lit gold beneath him. And Hessa, who missed very little, watched him with her deep-well eyes and said, "You are turning something over, sir. I can hear it like a stone in a shoe. Out with it." "Is it going to be all right?" Harry asked. He did not look away from the window. "The bank and the grasping men and all of it. Barrow keeps saying we have to be ahead of them, but he says it in the voice he uses when he's worried and doesn't want me to know. Is it going to be all right, Hessa? Really?" The old elf was quiet a while, and then she came and stood beside him at the window, small and bent, and looked out with him over the valley. She had kept a lamp burning above for 101 years. "I will not lie to you, sir, for this is a house that does not lie to its heir, and I am too old to start," she said. "There is danger coming. I have lived a very long time, and I can feel the shape of it on its way, the same shape that came for your grandparents' world and your parents' world, the shape of men who want what is not theirs. It will come here, sir, to this valley, before it is done. That much I will tell you true." She reached up and laid one small hand on the cold stone of the sill beside the burning lamp. "But I will tell you this also, and it is truer. This house has stood 1,000 years. It has outlasted kings and wars and plagues and the slow forgetting of its own family, and it has never once in all that time been taken by any man who came against it, because its walls are not made of stone, sir, whatever they look like. They are made of exactly the thing you brought back into this house 3 weeks ago when you lit the fire, and that thing does not lose in the end to the grasping men. It never has. It is only that sometimes, sir, it costs a great deal to win." She turned her deep eyes on him. "You ask me the truth, and there it is. It will not be easy, and it will not be free, and it will frighten you before it is over. But you will not face it alone, and you will not face it undefended, and this old house has never yet failed an heir who lit its fire. Sleep, sir. Tomorrow you go to meet the goblins, and the lamp will be burning here when you come home, as it has burned every night of your life, whether you knew it or not." Harry looked at the small, steady flame in the window, and out at the dark hills where the danger was gathering somewhere beyond sight, and he put his marked hand flat against the cold stone of the sill beside Hessa's, over the warm reach of his own waking house, and his hand on the sill was steady, steadier than it had any right to be with the dark hills waiting out there, and he had the letter with the blood-dark seal folded in his pocket. And in the morning he would carry it into the oldest bank in the world and set his blood upon a ledger and become, in the eyes of law and gold and goblin oath, what the wards had already made him in the eyes of the deep magic, the Lord of Heartsmere and no man's to take. Chapter 4 and Chapter 5. The bank of iron and oath. Corin took them at dawn, and the going was nothing like the road. The road unfolded, Corin's magic folded. Harry felt the young elf's small hand tighten around his own, and Barrow's dry old fingers close about his other wrist, and then the great lit hall of Heartsmere was gone between one blink and the next, snatched away with a sound like a struck drum and a squeezing that took his breath, and set down again all in the same instant, in a narrow shadowed passage that smelled of coal smoke and cold stone and faintly of unfamiliar magic. 100 small spells layered on the air like the smell of a kitchen after a feast. Harry swayed. Corin steadied him with both hands and a stream of anxious apology, and Barrow said, "Breathe, sir. It is quicker than the road, but it is ruder. It passes," and it did pass, and Harry straightened and drew the deep green hood a little further forward over his glamoured brow and looked out of the mouth of the passage at the wizarding world for the first time in his memory. It was early, and the great crooked street beyond was only beginning to wake, and that, Barrow had said, was the whole point of coming at dawn. But even half asleep, it was the most extraordinary thing Harry had ever seen. A cobbled way ran off crookedly in both directions between buildings that leaned over it at impossible angles, none of them square, none of them the same height, shouldering one another for room, their windows crammed with things Harry had no names for, a display of cauldrons stacked in a gleaming pyramid, copper and pewter, and one of solid silver, a window of owls, dozens of them, blinking down at the street with round gold eyes. A cascade of broomsticks in a case, and a knot of the tails twitching as if impatient to be off, barrels of what looked like dragon liver and jars of eyes, and a great coiled thing asleep in a tank. A witch in plum robes was sweeping her step. A wizard went by yawning with a stack of self-shuffling newspapers under his arm, the photographs on the front page moving, a tiny gray figure waving up out of the print. Smoke curled from 100 crooked chimneys. And over all of it, at the far end of the street where the way widened into a square, rising white and vast and slightly, unsettlingly crooked above every other roof, stood a building of such size and such age that Harry knew what it was before Barrow said a word, because it looked exactly like what it was, which was the oldest and deepest vault in the world. "Gringotts, sir," said Barrow low at his side. "Keep your hood forward and your eyes open and your hand in mine, and remember what I told you. You are the lord of an older house than any stone in this street. Walk like it, sir, not proudly, certainly. There is a difference, and the goblins know it better than anyone alive." He set off up the waking street, small and bent and immaculate in his green livery, Corin at Harry's other side, and Harry between them with the great green hood forward and his marked hand warm in the old steward's grip. And they went up Diagon Alley toward the white tower in the pale gold light of the early morning, 3 travelers from a valley the maps did not show, come to set a boy's blood upon a ledger and secure 1,000 years of inheritance before a grey man in London could file a form. The great bronze doors of Gringotts stood atop a flight of white steps, and beside them, in a livery of scarlet and gold, stood a goblin, and Harry slowed despite himself, because he had never seen one, and it was not what he had pictured. It was small, no taller than himself, but there was nothing childlike in it. It was old and hard and contained, with a long clever face and long clever fingers and eyes as black and flat and unreadable as the eyes of a bird, and it watched the 3 of them come up the steps with an attention that missed nothing. The hood, the livery, the elf steward, the small hand in the old one. And when Barrow stopped before it and bowed exactly so, neither too low nor too shallow, the goblin's black eyes went to Harry and stayed there, and something changed in the long clever face, a sharpening. "The House of Potter is expected," said Barrow formally. "The heir attends by the bank's own invitation to confirm his blood and take up his inheritance under the bank's seal." The doorward goblin did not answer him. It went on looking at Harry at the shadowed place under the hood where his eyes were, and then deliberately it bowed, low, lower than Harry had seen anyone bow, and it spoke not to Barrow but past him to Harry in a voice like 2 flints struck together. "The deep ward spoke your name in the night 3 weeks gone, young lord," it said. "There is not a goblin in this bank who did not feel the old oath pull tight when they did. Gringotts has waited 100 years to open these doors to Potter. Enter and be welcome, and mind the warning writ above them, for it was writ for thieves, and you are come home to what is yours." And it turned and set its long fingers to the bronze, and the great doors of the oldest bank in the world swung inward for the heir of Heartsmere. Over the inner doors, silver letters were set into the white stone, and Harry, who had learned a great many of his letters that summer in the library at home, stopped beneath them and read slowly the words of the warning. that the thief who took what was not theirs, who thought treasure and did not earn it, would find more there than gold, would find the thing they had earned instead, waiting. He read it twice. He thought about a gray man in an office he had never seen, filing a form to take a house that had reached across 100 miles to love a starved child, and he thought that whatever was waiting in the deep vaults for men like that, it was probably not enough, and then he thought that it was not for him to say, and went in through the doors, and did not know that he had, unknowing, wished exactly the goblin wish, which is why the doorward, who had watched him read it, followed him inside with something new in the set of its clever shoulders. Inside was a hall to rival the great hall of the manor, and older and feeling colder, a vast vaulted chamber of white marble worn to soft sheen by 10 centuries of feet, lit by high windows and by chandeliers of 100 candles each, and lined down both its endless length by high counters at which goblins sat upon tall stools, weighing, counting, writing, the scratch of 100 quills, and the chime of gold on scales filling the great space with a dry, ceaseless music. Wizards and witches moved between the counters, small under the vaulting, and did not look up, and did not see the hooded child go by, because the goblin who had met them at the door now walked before them, and where that goblin walked, a path opened, other goblins glancing up from their work and going still, quills pausing, black eyes tracking the small, green-hooded figure the length of the hall, so that Harry walked to the far end of Gringotts through a lengthening silence. A hush spreading out from him counter by counter, 100 goblins marking the passage of a thing they had felt in their bones 3 weeks before, and had not, most of them, believed they would live to see. At the end of the hall, before a great door of black iron worked with the crossed key and sword, an old goblin waited, in robes of dark gray rather than livery, with an iron chain of office about his neck and an ancient ledger held in the crook of one arm, and his long face was folded and severe, and when Harry came before him, the old goblin looked at him for a long moment and then inclined his head, a fraction, no more. "I am Gorbrand," he said, "keeper of the Potter accounts, as my father was, and his father, back to the drawing of the first contract. It was my hand you saw in the margin of the ledger, young lord, though you did not see it, for you were 100 miles away lighting a fire when I wrote it. Come. The director attends this himself, which he does perhaps once in a decade, and he does not like to be kept, and neither, if you are wise, will you learn to. Through here, your steward and your elf may attend you. What is done here is old, and it is exact, and it cannot be undone once begun, so I will tell you each step before we take it, because a potter is owed the truth of a right before he stands in it. Do you understand me, young lord?" "Yes," said Harry. His voice came out smaller than he wanted in the huge cold hall, and he cleared his throat and drew the hood back from his face at last, here where there were no wizards to see, and looked the old goblin in the eye as Barrow had told him to, green eyes meeting flat black ones. "Yes, Master Gorbrand, thank you for keeping our accounts all this time when there was no one to thank you for it. That was 100 years of doing a job with no one at the other end of it. I know what that's like. I'd like to thank you properly later when I understand how, but I wanted to say it now first before the right in case I get it wrong in there. Thank you." There was a silence. Gorbrand's folded face did not move, but something happened behind the flat black eyes, a flicker quickly mastered, and beside Harry old Barrow went very still and Corrin's ears trembled. Goblins are not thanked. It is not in the long cold commerce between their kind and wizard kind to be thanked. They are paid or cheated or feared or flattered, but the plain courtesy of a wizard thanking a goblin for a century of faithful and unwitnessed work was a coin so rare that Gorbrand, who was 200 years old and had heard nearly everything, had never once in his long life been handed it, and did not for a moment know what to do with it. "You will not get it wrong in there, young lord," he said at last, gruffly, and turned, and the great iron door opened before them. "Come." Beyond it lay a smaller chamber, round, windowless, older than the hall, its walls of unworked black stone and its floor a single disk of white marble inlaid with a great circle of goblin runes in silver and gold, and in the center of the circle stood a plain black plinth, and on the plinth lay two things, a shallow bowl of some dark unshining metal and a ledger vast, ancient, bound in dragon hide gone black with age, its cover stamped with the standing heart of the Potters. And behind the plinth, in a high chair of black iron, sat the oldest goblin Harry had yet seen, folded like a walnut, still as carved stone, with eyes that were not flat at all but deep, and old and terribly shrewd, and Harry knew without being told that this was Ragnok, director of the vaults, who came down to the right chamber perhaps once in a decade and had come down for him. "The last Potter," said Ragnok. His voice was very quiet and filled the round room to its curved black walls. "Come into the circle, child. No, your steward stays without. The silver line is for blood alone. Come and stand upon the mark, and we will see what the deep magic has already decided, and set our seal beneath its judgment, and make a lord of you in the eyes of gold and law as the wards have already made you in the eyes of the old power. Come." Gringotts does not bite the ones it is sworn to. The deep old eyes glinted. Only the ones it is not. Harry stepped over the silver line alone and crossed to the plinth, small and upright in his green cloak with the hood thrown back, and stood upon the mark of white marble in the center of the great runic circle, and the moment both his feet were within it, the runes woke all around him. A ring of silver and gold light rising softly from the floor, and the mark in his palm woke to answer them, green gold. And Ragnar leaned forward in his iron chair, and Gorbrand opened the great black ledger to a page near its very end, a page that had been blank, Harry saw, for 100 years, the last written line above it dated in a year he did not know but understood to be the year the house was sealed. "The rite is simple," said Gorbrand, "and it is ancient, and it does not lie, for it is bound to the blood, and blood does not lie to goblins. You will take the silver knife. You will let 3 drops of your blood fall into the bowl, no more, for the bowl will take what it needs. And the ledger will read your blood and write what it finds, and what it writes cannot be forged or bought or gainsaid in any court of wizards or goblins in the world. If you are the heir, the ledger will name you heir, and name all that is yours, and the accounts will open to your hand. If you are not," Gorbrand's black eyes were steady. "If you are not, young lord, the deep magic in this room will know it, and I will not describe to a child what becomes of one who spills false blood into the bowl of the potters. But you already lit the fire, so take the knife, and do not be afraid, and claim what is yours." Harry looked at the small silver knife lying on the black plinth, and at the dark bowl, and at the ancient waiting ledger with the heart on its cover, and he thought about Mella pressing 3 words into his palm, and he took up the knife, which was cold and very sharp, and he pricked the ball of his marked thumb, quickly, the way you do a thing you do not want to think too hard about, and he held his hand over the bowl and let fall 1 drop, and 2 and 3, dark red into the dark metal, and drew his hand back, and the small cut sealed itself at once, warm, the mark on his palm flaring as it did. The blood did not spread in the bowl. It gathered 3 drops, drawing together into 1 bead that shone, impossibly, with a light of its own, green gold, the light of the mark, the light of the road, the light of the hearth, and the bead rose out of the bowl into the air and hung there turning. And from it a fine thread of the same light ran down and touched the open page of the great ledger, and the ledger began to write itself. It wrote in gold in a hand that formed as they watched, swift and sure across the 100-year blank page, and Gorbrand read it aloud into the round black room as it came, and his gruff voice, against his own long habit, grew slower and lower as he read, because the deep magic was writing a thing that even the keeper of the Potter accounts had not known the full of. "Harry James Potter," Gorbrand read. "Son of James Charles Potter, son of Fleamont Potter, son of Henry Potter, called Harry, of the direct and unbroken male line," the gold hand wrote on. "Heir of the house of Potter, of Linfred of Stinchcombe, the founder of Hardwin Potter, the builder of Hartsmere, and through Ireland of the house of Peveril, wife of Hardwin, heir of the blood of the Peverils, and of that which the Peverils carried, and of the deep wards raised upon it." The gold hand paused, and then wrote a line that made Ragnar himself sit forward in his iron chair, and made Gorbrand stop, and read it twice in silence before he read it aloud. "Confirmed and acclaimed heir not by this right alone, but by the deep wards of Hartsmere, which have of their own accord woken and known him and taken him, and shielded him prior to this confirmation, which the wards do not do, and have not done, for any Potter in 11 generations." He looked up from the page, and his black eyes found Harry across the ring of light, and there was something in them now that had not been there at the door. "The wards chose you before we ever sent for you, young lord. Do you understand what that is? A house does not merely accept an heir. It endures him mostly and answers his hand because it must, but Hartsmere did not wait to be claimed. It reached out and claimed you, a starved child in a stranger's garden, and woke 100 years early to do it, and there is not one goblin in 10,000 years of our records who has seen the deep magic move so for love and not for blood alone. That is written now in the oldest ledger we keep. That cannot be unwritten. You are not a Potter who owns Hartsmere, young lord. You are a Potter Hartsmere owns, and there has not been one of those since the days the runes on this floor were cut." And then the ledger showed him what was his, and it was a very great deal. It wrote it in columns of that same gold, and Gorbrand read it, and Harry stood in the ring of light and listened to the inventory of 1,000 years. The gold in the vaults, which was a number so large it meant nothing to him, and made Corin, listening at the silver line, sit down abruptly on the black floor. The lands, farms, and forests in a stretch of the western coast, tenanted and rented and grown fat over a century of careful goblin stewardship. The library, appraised and catalogued, a treasure in itself, books that other men had killed for. And the heirlooms of the deep vault, which Gorbrand read more slowly still. The silver hunting horn of Hardwin Potter, that could call aid across 100 miles to any who wound it in true need. The healer's chest of Linfred, whose remedies did not spoil and whose like could not be brewed by any living hand. A plain gray standing stone the size of a man's fist, unmarked, that was the Peveril warding stone, the heart tanker of the deep wards, kept in the vault against the day the house should need to be rewoken. And now, the ledger noted in its gold hand, no longer required in the vault, for the house was woken, and its heart tanker should go home to its heir. And the signet of the house of Potter, the Lord's ring, that no hand could wear but the confirmed heirs, and that had lain in the dark of the deep vault for 100 years, waiting. Gorbrand went himself to fetch the last two. Down some stair Harry did not see and was gone a while, and came back bearing a small iron casket, and set it upon the plinth, and opened it, and within lay a ring, heavy old dark gold, the standing heart worked into its face, and beside it a plain grey stone that seemed to drink the light of the room and give back a low warmth Harry could feel from 3 feet away, the same warmth as the mark in his palm, the same warmth as the hearth. The warmth of his own house condensed into a thing he could hold. The stone is yours to carry home, young lord, and I would carry it well, for it is the anchor of everything, said Gorbrand. But the ring you must put on yourself here now, before the director and the ledger and the blood, for the ring is the last word of the right, and until you wear it you are the heir confirmed but not the lord invested, and there is a difference in law and in oath, and it is a difference a certain grey man in London is counting on. He stood back. Take up the signet of your house, Harry Potter, and put it on, and be Lord of Hartsmere in the eyes of all the powers there are. Harry took up the ring. It was far too big for any finger of his 6-year-old hand, heavy and cold, a grown man's ring, and for a moment he did not know what to do, and he looked at it, and then he looked at Gorbrand, and he said honestly, because the house did not lie in neither, he had decided, would he, it won't fit. My hands are too little. I don't want to put it on and have it fall off in the middle of the important part. And Ragnok, director of the vaults, 200 years old, who came down to this chamber once in a decade, made a sound that no goblin present had ever heard him make, a short dry bark that was, unmistakably, a laugh. Put it on, child, he said, and there was something almost gentle under the iron of it. The ring knows its lord. It will fit the hand it is given, be that hand large or small. It has waited 100 years. It will not fall off in the important part. Harry slid the great cold ring onto his finger, and it moved as it went, the metal flowing, warm now, closing itself to the size of his small finger as if it had always been made for exactly that hand. And the moment it seated, the whole ring of runes on the floor blazed up bright, and the mark in his palm blazed to answer, and the grey warding stone in the casket pulsed once, hard like a heart, and Harry felt 100 miles away. The whole vast body of Hartsmere surge and ring like a struck bell, felt the wards leap up another degree toward their old full strength, felt the house know, through gold and blood and goblin oath and the ancient stone in the casket, that its heir was not only awake and returned but invested and crowned, lord-in-law as he was lord in love, and far away across half of England the lamp in the west tower flared for a moment to twice its size, and old Hessa keeping it laughed out loud alone in the tower for no reason she could have named. Harry stood with the warm ring on his finger and the great runic circle dimming around him, and he found he had a question, and he had learned at Hartsmere that questions asked plainly were usually answered kindly, and so he asked it. Master Gorbrand, director, why is there an oath at all, between my family and the bank, I mean? Barrow keeps calling it older than the ministry and saying it binds you to us, but nobody's told me why. Why would goblins swear an oath to a family of wizards, when wizards have mostly, from what I've read this summer, not been very fair to goblins? The round black room went very still, and Gorbrand and Ragnok exchanged a look, a long flat goblin look, and then Ragnok lowered himself back into the iron chair because it was, it turned out, a thing worth sitting down to tell. You have read that wizards have not been fair to goblins, he said, and you have read true, and it is the first fair word a Potter has said in this chamber in 100 years, so I will pay it back with a true tale. There was a winter, young lord, 900 years gone, when a plague came into the deep tunnels, a wasting that no goblin healer could touch, and it went through the warrens under the city like fire through dry gorse, and the goblin nation was dying in the dark, and no wizard would come down to us, for we were beneath their notice, coin counters, tunnel things not worth the saving. No wizard would come, save one. The deep old eyes held Harry's. A healer named Linfrid of a place called Stinchcombe, who had already spent his life going where other healers would not, to the poor, to the cursed, to the unfashionable sick. Linfrid came down into the tunnels, alone, an old man with his chest of remedies, and he stayed the whole of that black winter, and he did not leave until the wasting was broken, and he asked for nothing, and he took nothing, and he named no price. And when the goblin nation offered him gold, all the gold he could carry in the way of our people, who understand debts if we understand nothing else, he refused it, and said only that if the goblins wished to repay him they might, one day, do a kindness for his family, should his family ever have need, for he had children, and the world was hard. Ragnok's folded face did not move, but his voice had gone deep and formal, reciting a thing carved in the memory of his people. And the goblin nation, who do not forget a debt in 900 years, swore then an oath that has bound Gringotts to the line of Linfrid, which is the line of Potter, from that winter to this, that the bank would keep faith with his blood and hold its wealth true, and stand its ground for the last of his line as he stood his in the dark of our dying. That is the oath, young lord, it was not bought. It was earned by an old man who came down into the dark when no one else would, and it has waited 900 years to be of use, and this morning at last it is. He inclined his head a fraction. You asked why goblins would swear to wizards. We would not, and we have not, save once, to the one wizard in 1,000 years who treated us as a people whose dying mattered. You come of him, try to be worthy of it. You have made a fair beginning. "It is done," said Ragnarok, and rose again and stood, and the runes sank back into the floor, recorded and sealed. In the eyes of Gringotts and of every law and oath the bank can enforce, the House of Potter has a living, confirmed, invested lord, and its estate is sealed under our hand, and there is no power in Britain that can now escheat it, or survey it, or take it by any clean and lawful means. The deep old eyes fixed on Harry. "But you did not come here only for the clean and lawful means to fail, young lord, and I did not come down to this room for a right my keeper could have witnessed alone. There is an unclean means, and there is a man who intends to use it, and you should hear the whole of it from me before you go home, because it is coming to your door, and soon." He came around the plinth, small and folded and grim, and he told Harry about Ambrose Kroll. He told it plainly, in the sharp, cold way goblins tell of threats, without softening it for the child, because Ragnarok did not believe in softening threats, and because he had judged, watching this child thank his account-keeper and refuse to jam a falling ring onto a right, that here was a young lord who would rather have the shape of the danger hole. He told him of the office of reversions and escheats, and of the instrument that watched the dying houses, and of the one grey man who had watched the Potter estate on it for 11 years, waiting for the line to fail so he could harvest it. He told him that the estate's waking had ruined that man's patient scheme, and that such men, when their schemes are ruined, do not go home, they change the game. He told him that Kroll could no longer take Hartsmere by the clean law of escheat, now that the bank had sealed it, but that Kroll had another door, a narrow, dirty door, the emergency power of his office to declare a dormant estate a magical hazard to the public, and take it into protective ministry survey over the head of the bank's seal on his own signature, for the length of time it took to complete the survey, which a determined man could stretch to years, and in those years a great deal could be lost, or broken, or quietly made to disappear, and a small heir could be quietly declared unfit or unsafe or an impostor and set aside. "He cannot make it stick in the end," said Ragnarok. "The wards will testify against him, and we will testify against him, and the deep magic does not recognize a ministry survey any more than the sea recognizes a line drawn on a map. But he does not need it to stick in the end, he needs it to stick long enough. He needs to get onto your grounds under the color of law before the ink of our seal is dry in the ministry's own records, which will take some days to file, for the ministry is slow, and Kroll has friends who will make it slower. As hired, we have reason to believe, a curse-breaker of the worst and most capable sort, to open your outer wards, which are old and thin and 100 years untended, so that his survey party may walk onto the grounds of Hartsmere with the ministry's seal in one hand and a professional wand-breaker in the other, and stand in your gardens and begin the slow legal murder of your inheritance from the inside." The director's deep eyes did not blink. "He will be moving already, young lord. The moment word reaches him that a child came to Gringotts today and claimed the Potter estate, and it will reach him, for the ministry has ears even in this hall, he will know his last clean chance is gone, and he will stop being patient, and patience was the only slow thing about him. Go home today this hour, and do not stop to see the sights. Wake your house, ready your wards. And know that Gringotts stands with you by the oath, though the oath binds us to gold and record and testimony, and not, I will tell you plainly, to war. We will bury him in parchment, and we will damn him before every court there is, but we cannot send goblins to hold your gate. That is not the shape of the oath, and I will not lie to Lord I have just invested. The gate you must hold yourself." Something moved in the ancient face. "But you have held worse, I think, than a grey man with a form. You held 100 years of that other house and came out of it able to thank an old goblin no one had ever thanked. Hold your gate, Harry Potter. The house that reached across 100 miles to claim you will not stand idle while a clerk tries to steal it. Trust the deep magic. It chose you. Now go." They went. There was no time for the sights, and Harry did not want them. The wizarding world had gone from a marvel to a backdrop in the space of an hour, because his house was 100 miles away with a curse-breaker coming for its gate. Gorbran walked them back the length of the great marble hall, and the goblins looked up again as they passed, counter by counter, but it was different now. The black eyes following the small, green-cloaked lord with the ring flowing warm on his finger and the grey stone heavy in his pocket, and at the great bronze doors Gorbran stopped and did a thing that made old Barrow go rigid and silent beside him. A thing Barrow told Harry afterward he had seen a goblin do for a wizard exactly twice in his 100 years. He drew from his own robe a small iron token, stamped with the crossed key and sword, and pressed it into Harry's hand, and folded the small fingers over it. "That is my mark, young Lord Gorbran's own, keeper of your accounts," he said gruffly. "Any goblin in Britain will know it, and know that the one who carries it has Gorbran's word behind him, and a goblin's word is not the ministry's. If you have need of the bank, true need, send it by any means at any hour, and it will be answered as fast as gold can move. It is not a sword. I cannot give you a sword, the oath forbids it. But it is more than most wizards will ever hold of a goblin, and I give it to a lord who thanked me for 100 years of unwitnessed work which no wizard has ever done, and which I find, to my considerable annoyance, I am not able to forget. The flat black eyes held his. "Go home and hold your gate, Harry Potter. And when this is done, come back and thank me properly, as you said you would, and we will begin the long good work of a Potter and Gringotts trusting one another again, which has not happened in 100 years, and is worth more than all the gold in your vaults. Now go, Corin, take your lord home." Far away, in a grey office on the 4th floor of the ministry, a folded note appeared on Ambrose Kroll's desk in the hand of one of the several quiet people he paid to keep their ears open in places he could not be, and Kroll unfolded it, and read the 4 lines written there, and set it down, and sat for a moment very still. A child. A hooded child this morning at the bank, attended by an elf in green livery of an antique cut, closeted with Gorbrand, and the note said, with the director himself, which the director did for no one, and emerged an hour later with a ring on his hand that had not been there going in. The Potter estate sealed, invested, beyond the clean law as of this morning, forever. Ambrose Kroll did not rage. He drew his emergency order toward him, the protective survey of a dormant estate posing an unassessed magical hazard, and he dipped his pen, and in the space he had left blank he wrote at last the thing he had spent 11 years and a small fortune learning. The location of the valley the maps did not show, and he signed it and sealed it with the seal of his office. And it was from that moment, law, dirty, narrow, desperate law, but law, and it would hold long enough. Then he rose and took his grey cloak from its peg, and went to find Dreng, because the clean chance was gone and only the dirty one remained, and the dirty one had a clock on it now, ticking, and Ambrose Kroll did not intend to lose a prize he had waited 11 years for, to a child with a ring, not while there was one narrow door still open and a burned man who would break it down for gold. Corin set them down in the great hall of Hartsmere with the drum crack and the squeeze, and Harry staggered and caught himself on the back of the heir's chair, and the house rose up around him warm and vast and lit, and knew him at once, and knew the ring, and knew the grey stone in his pocket, and the whole manor rang softly with welcome, hearths brightening in 100 rooms, and the elves came running, and the portraits called down the stairwells, and for one moment it was only the gladness of coming home. The ring warm on his finger, and the anchor stone heavy and humming in his pocket, and his own house singing around him. Tibbet reached him first, and seized both his hands, and turned them over to see the ring, and made a sound, and pressed her apron to her mouth. Corin, having set them down, sat abruptly on the flagstones with his legs gone out from under him, worn to nothing by the double crossing and by the sheer feat of having carried his lord to the bank and home again without a fault, and 2 other elves rushed to fuss over him. The hearth in the small library 3 rooms away roared up gold of its own accord, feeling the anchor stone come home, and every candle in the great hall stood up straight and burned white for a moment, and Barrow, coming through last and slow, leaning on Harry's shoulder, looked around at the house blazing its welcome and opened his mouth to say something about tea, because tea was what he said when a thing was too large to say. Then Ireland's deep voice cut through all of it from the long gallery above, urgent, iron, carrying to every stone of the house at once. "He is here," she said. "The Heartstone is home, and the wards are up to strength, and I can feel the whole valley now, my lord, clear to its furthest edge, and I tell you there is a stranger at the western wood, 2 of them. One bears the ministry's seal, cold and grasping, and the other," her voice changed, went low and hard as the black stone of the right chamber, "the other has hands that have unmade 100 wards, and he is standing at the edge of my valley with his head cocked, listening to the shape of my walls, and he is not listening as a man listens. He is listening as a wolf listens at the mouth of a warren. They have come, my lord, sooner than the goblins thought. They are here." Harry stood in the great hall with the ring warm on his hand and the anchor stone humming in his pocket and his whole waking house around him. And out beyond the western wood a grey man and a burned man stood at the edge of everything he had, and he was 6 years old and lord of Hartsmere, and he did not run and he did not cry, and he lifted his chin toward the long gallery and the deep dark eyes waiting in it, and he said in a voice that shook only a little and did not shake at all where it counted, "All right, then we don't let them in. Wake the whole house, Ireland, everyone. Tell them their lord is home, and tell them nobody takes our gate." Chapter 5 and Chapter 6. The Esheater at the gate. They held the council in the small library, around the hearth, because that was the center of the house, and because the anchor stone lay there now on the mantel where Harry had set it, humming its low, warm note into the room, and because if the worst came, the hearth was where the worst would have to be met. The portraits of Ireland and Hardwin and old Henry had been brought down and stood along the wall, and Barrow was there, and Hessa down from her tower, and Tibbet, and the elders of the household, and Corin at Harry's shoulder where he had lately taken to standing. And Harry sat in the wide chair by the fire that was too big for him and did not try to look bigger in it, and listened, because Ireland was explaining the wards, and everything turned on the wards. "You must understand what you hold, my lord, before you are asked to hold it against a man," she said from her frame, her deep dark eyes moving over them all. "The wards of Hartsmere are not one thing. They are 3, set one inside another like the rings of a felled oak, and the man at the gate will meet them in turn, and it matters a great deal which ring he stands in. The outermost is the boundary ward, the skin of the valley that hides us and turns aside the idle and the lost. It is wide and it is old, and I will not lie to you, it is weak. 100 years of sleep has worn it thin, and a true curse breaker, given time, can peel it. Expect him to. Do not spend your heart defending it. It is a wall of paper, and it was never meant to stop a determined siege, only to keep the valley from being stumbled upon. And the second ring? Harry asked. The second is the house ward proper, the walls and the terraces and the near gardens, the ground the family has walked and warmed for 1,000 years. That is strong, my lord, far stronger than the boundary, and it will cost him dearly, and it will fight him, for it is quick with the life the house has taken back since you woke it. But it too can be broken in the end by force and patience and enough skill, because it is made of spellwork, deep though it is, and spellwork can be unmade by one who knows the grammar of it. Her voice dropped, and the whole room leaned toward her. But the third ring, my lord, the third ring is the heart ward, and it is not spellwork at all, and it cannot be unmade, because it is not made of any grammar a cursebreaker knows. It is the Peveril magic, the deepest we have, and it is the thing I told you of on your first day in this gallery, do you remember, when you did not understand a word of it? It is love made permanent. It is 1,000 years of potters loving this house and each other and their own, anchored now in the stone you carried home in your pocket, and bound now to you its lord who lit the fire. And a thing made of that child cannot be broken from without by any force in the world. Not by curse, not by law, not by armies. It can only fail in one of 3 ways. She held up one long pale finger. If its heir dies, or if its heir flees and abandons it and gives up his claim in his heart, or if its heir, standing in the heart of it of his own will, surrenders it and opens the door and lets the enemy in. 3 fingers now held up in the firelight: death, flight, surrender. Those are the only 3 doors into the heart of Heartsmere, my lord, and every one of them can be opened only by you. The curse-breaker cannot force the third ring, so he and his master will not in the end try to force it. They will try to make you open it. Remember that above everything else I have told you tonight. When the force fails, and it will fail, the danger stops being to your walls and starts being to your will. They will come for your will, child, and that no ward can defend. That you must hold yourself. Harry was quiet, turning the ring on his finger, watching the heart fire he had lit burn steady and gold in the ancient grate. So I have to stay, he said at last, right in the middle at the hearth, and I have to not die and not run away and not give up, and if I do all 3 of those they can't win, no matter what they break. That is the whole of it, my lord, said Iolanthe, and there was iron approval in it. Set plainly enough that a child of 6 has it entire, which is more than most grown lords of warded houses ever troubled to learn. Stay, hold, do not open the door. The house will do the rest, and the house is very old and very strong and very much in love with you, and it has been waiting 100 years for something worth defending. Give it that and let it fight. There is one thing more, my lord, and I will say it, though the lady may not thank me. Old Hardwin, who almost never spoke, and the room turned to him. The heart ward draws its strength from you and from all whom you hold as your own and name into it. The more you love and the more of your household you take under its shield, the stronger it burns, but that is also its price. What you shield you feel. If they strike your walls, you will feel it in your own body. If they hurt when you have named into the ward, you will feel that too, a hurt of your own, because to the deep magic it is your own. I would not have you meet that unwarned grandson. It is the cost of being the keystone. You will not stand outside this and command it safe. You will stand in the very middle of it, and every blow the house takes you will take, and you must not let it drive you to the door. The bearded old face was grave. Can you carry that? Speak true. There is no shame in a child saying no. We will find another way to love you if you cannot. Harry thought about it. He thought about Mella, who had walked 6 years on legs no longer than his arm, and poured out the whole of herself, and called it the thing she wanted most. He thought about the lamp in the tower burning 100 years for a boy who might never come. He looked around the firelit room at the small gray faces watching him, at Corin at his shoulder, at Tibbet with her apron twisted in her hands, at Barrow, at the portraits of his own blood, at everything he had been given in a single summer after 6 years of being given nothing, and he found that the answer was not hard at all. They spent 100 years defending me before I even knew this place was real, he said. Hessa kept a lamp lit, you all kept the house standing, Mella died doing it. Nobody asked me first, and nobody said there was any shame in it if it hurt. His chin came up, and he did not know he had done it, and he looked at old Hardwin steadily. It's my turn, of course I can carry it, it's my house, it's my family, if it hurts, it hurts. I'd rather hurt for them than be safe on my own. I've been safe on my own my whole life, and it was the worst thing that ever happened to me. He turned the ring on his finger once more. Tell me where to stand. For a moment no one spoke, and then Corin at his shoulder made a small fierce sound and pressed the back of his hand hard against his mouth, and Tibbet's apron went up over her whole face, and old Barrow bowed his head, and Hardwin Potter looked down from his frame at the thin child in the too big chair and said very low, There is your father and you, grandson, and your mother both. God help the gray man at the gate, he does not know what he has come to steal. They made the house ready through the night. It was not readied like a fortress out of a storybook, with boiling oil and battlements. It was readied like a family bracing for a hard winter, which was closer to the truth of what it was, and there was something in that plainness that steadied Harry more than any armory could have. The elves went through the house closing the great shutters, not against arrows but to keep the near gardens whole. They moved the most fragile of the heirlooms down into the deep cellars where the second ward ran strongest. Tibbet, who would not be told that the middle of a siege was no time to cook, filled the kitchen with bread and broth against the long day coming, because an army, she said with terrible dignity, marches on its stomach, and so does a house, and no lord of hers was going to defend his gate on an empty one. And one by one, through the small hours, the household came to Harry at the hearth, each of them, all 30 of them, and stood before his chair, and asked formally, in the old way Barrow taught them, to be named into the ward, to be taken under the heir's shield, to stand as the Lord's own in the fight. He had not expected that. Barrow had to explain it to him, low, aside, that being named into the heart ward was a binding, a joining, that it meant an elf's strength would feed the shield and an elf's hurts would be the Lord's hurts and the Lord's theirs, that no elf could be commanded into it, that it had to be freely asked and freely given both ways, and that the whole household, to the last and youngest, was asking. Harry sat in the great chair and took each small grey hand as it was offered, and said the words Barrow gave him, and named them in one after another, Tibbet and Dilly, who had not spoken in 40 years and stood now side by side, and Pot, who carried their messages, and Hesse of the lamp, and old Dunn the gardener, who had tended 100 years of wild roses, and Pell and all the rest, and last of all Corin, who was shaking, who had followed him at 6 feet for a whole summer and stood now before the chair unable to get the formal words out at all. You don't have to say it right, Corin, Harry told him gently. I know what you're asking. You've been asking it since the day I lit the fire. The answer's yes. It's been yes the whole time. And he took the young elf's trembling hands and named him into the shield, and Corin sat down on the hearthstone at Harry's feet and would not be moved from it for the rest of the night, and Harry did not ask him to, because he understood now that this was not a servant at his master's feet. This was a family closing ranks around the last and smallest of them, which happened to be, by the strange arithmetic of an old house, the one they had all sworn to serve. They came out of the western wood a little after dawn. Iolanthe felt them first and spoke the word, and the whole house went still and quiet, and Harry went to the tall library window with the anchor stone warm on the mantel behind him and looked out and down across the terraces and the wild gardens and the pale mere to the edge of the valley, where 2 figures had stepped out of the trees onto the old boundary of the estate and stopped, and stood, and looked up at the great grey house waking to the sun. Even at that distance Harry knew them for what they were. One was tall and hard and burned down one side of his face, and he carried nothing in his scarred hands but held them a little away from his body ready, and he had cocked his head to one side and was looking at the air above the boundary as though he could see the ward hanging there, which perhaps he could. The other was grey. Grey-cloaked, grey-faced, grey all through, a spare, unremarkable man who might have been a clerk in any office in Britain, and he held in one hand a rolled parchment with a seal that caught the early light, and he stood very still and looked up at Hartsmere with an expression that did not change and did not need to, the flat, patient hunger of a man looking at a thing he has decided is already his. That's him, Harry said. The grey one, that's Kroll. That is Kroll, said Iolanthe's voice from the gallery. And the other is the wolf, the ward breaker. Watch, my lord, he's going to knock. Grasping men always knock first. It costs them nothing and they think it makes them lawful. Kroll raised the rolled parchment, and though he was half a valley away his voice came up to the house clear and unhurried and cold, carried on some small spell of his own, a voice with no more heat in it than a form letter. I am Ambrose Kroll, Deputy Escheator of the Department of Magical Estates. I bear an order of the Ministry of Magic for the protective survey of this estate, which has been assessed a dormant property posing an unassessed magical hazard to the public. The order is lawful and sealed, and I will read it at the gate if any occupant wishes to hear it. I require entry. I require the wards lowered and the household assembled and the estate placed into ministry stewardship pending survey. This is not a raid. This is not a theft. This is the law, and the law will be obeyed today one way or another. A pause. The grey figure did not lower the parchment. There is a child in that house who has been told, I do not doubt, a great many pretty stories about his inheritance. Let me tell him a plainer one. No ward stands forever. No house holds against the ministry in the end. And every hour you make me spend at your gate is an hour that will be counted, when the survey is done, against the fitness of whoever is pretending to be lord of this place. Open the gate, it will go easier. It always goes easier for the ones who open the gate. The house answered him, not with a voice. The house did not have a voice, not for strangers. It answered him the way a body answers a splinter. As Kroll finished speaking, the great boundary ward, the thin worn skin of the valley, flushed into visibility all along its line. A vast dome of pale blue-white fire springing up from the ground at the wood's edge and curving away over the whole valley, over the house and the mere and the gardens, sealing them under a sky of cold light, and where the 2 grey figures stood at its foot the light burned brightest and hardest, refusing them. A wall of 100 years and 1,000 between the grasping man and the thing he had come to take. Kroll looked at the wall of light without expression. Then he lowered the parchment at last and turned his gray head a few degrees toward the burned man beside him, and said something Harry could not hear, and the burned man, Drang the ward breaker, rolled his scarred shoulders once and stepped forward to the very foot of the shining wall and lifted his empty hands and went to work. It did not look like much at first. There was no fire, no thunder, none of the flash Harry had half expected. Drang simply stood before the wall of light with his head cocked and his scarred hands moving slowly, precisely, as though he were feeling for the seams in a locked door in the dark, and where his fingers moved the blue-white fire of the boundary ward began, very gradually, to dim. He was not smashing it. He was unpicking it thread by thread, finding the 100-year weak places, the frayed knots and the worn joins, and easing them apart with a patience that was almost gentle and was, Harry understood with a cold turn of his stomach, far more dangerous than any fury, because fury the house could have thrown back, and this it could only feel, this slow expert unmaking, this professional at his professional work. "He is good," said Hardwin grimly from the wall. "Curse him, he is very good. He knows the old grammar, feel it, my lord, feel the boundary going." Harry felt it. That was the thing Hardwin had warned him of, and it was worse than the warning. As Drang unpicked the outer ward, Harry felt it in his own body, a fraying, a cold thinning, a sense of something at the very edge of his own skin being carefully, painlessly peeled, and he gripped the arms of the chair and made himself keep still and keep watching, and beside him on the hearthstone Corin pressed close against his knee, and behind him the anchorstone hummed its warm note, steadying, holding. It took Drang the better part of an hour. And then, with no more drama than a held breath let go, the boundary ward of Heartsmere failed. The great dome of pale fire over the valley guttered, and thinned and tore silently from the point where the wardbreaker stood, the tear running up and over and away across the whole sky of light until the dome unraveled entirely and was gone, and the ordinary morning sky stood bare and blue over the valley for the first time in 100 years, and Ambrose Kroll stepped forward, unhurried, over the fallen boundary onto the ground of Heartsmere with his sealed parchment in his hand, and began to walk up the long slope toward the house. Harry felt the boundary go like a coat pulled off him in the cold, and he swayed in the chair, and Corin caught his hand, and old Barrow was there at once with a steadying grip on his shoulder. "The first ring only, my lord," the steward said, low and fierce. "The paper wall, it was always going to fall, and it has fallen, and you are still here, and the house is still yours. Breathe. The second ring will not go so easily. The second ring will make him bleed for every foot." It did. Kroll came up the slope with Drang a few paces behind, and where the near gardens began, where the second ward ran, the house stopped being a body with a splinter and became a body with a fever, and it fought. The wild roses that Dunn had tended for 100 years came alive as the gray man passed, and reached for him, thorned canes lashing out of the hedges, and Drang's hands moved and turned them aside, but they came again and again, tangling his master's gray cloak, opening a line of red along the back of one gray hand, so that Kroll's flat voice said once, sharply, "Deal with the garden," and the wardbreaker had to stop and spend his skill on the roses instead of the walls. The fountain that had stood choked with fern for a century woke and threw its water across the path in a freezing sheet. The gravel of the terrace stairs shifted underfoot like a living thing. The very light in the near gardens thickened and pushed against the two intruders, so that they walked bent into a hard wind that was not there, heads down, the gray man's parchment held against his chest, and every yard they gained slowly and paid for, and the elves fought. Not with force, elves are not made for force, and Barrow had forbidden any of them to close with the burned man, whose cursebreaker's hands could unmake an elf as easily as a ward. They fought with the house, and with cleverness, and with the deep old elf magic of a bound household defending its own. They made the paths turn and double so that the intruders climbed the same terrace 3 times. They made doors appear in blank walls and open onto more walls. They filled the air of the gardens with the scent of the sleeping herb from Linford's physic bed, so that Drang's careful hands slowed and his cocked head drooped, and he had to shake himself awake and spend more of his strength than he had meant to. Corin, who could not bear to sit still on the hearthstone while the others fought, begged to be let help, and Barrow, against his own judgment, allowed him a small safe task, to run the near passages and carry word of where the intruders were, and Corin went, quick and devoted and eager to be of use, and that was the mistake, though no one could have known it, because the wardbreaker was quicker and colder than any of them had understood. It happened fast. Drang, harried by the roses and the turning paths and the sleeping herb, losing patience for the first time, stopped fighting the second ward gently and struck it hard once with the whole of his cold professional strength. A blow meant to stun a whole span of the house ward into silence so he could walk through the gap, and the ward blow rebounded as such blows do off a living ward and cracked outward through the near gardens, and Corin, darting across a terrace with word of the intruder's place, ran full into the edge of it. Harry felt it before he saw it. He felt the ward blow land on the house like a fist on his own chest, and under it, sharp and terrible in particular, he felt one of the lights he had named into the shield gutter and go gray and fall, and he was up out of the great chair and at the window with a cry before he knew he had moved, and down on the terrace below, small and green and crumpled, one hand still flung out toward the house he had been running to warn, lay Corin, not moving. Corin, Corin. Harry was at the library door at the stairs, and Barrow had him, both arms around him, holding him back, and Harry fought the old grip for the first time since he had come to Heartsmere. "Let me go, he's hurt, I named him in, I have to. You cannot leave the heart, my lord." Barrow's voice was breaking and iron at once. "If you leave the house he wins, do you understand me? That is flight, that is one of the 3 doors. If you run out into the gardens where he can reach you, it is over. Corin's hurt for nothing, and the house for nothing, and Mella for nothing. Hesse has him. Look, look, my lord, Hesse has him." And it was true, old Hesse and 2 others had reached the fallen elf and gathered him up between them, small and gray and breathing. Harry could see the shallow rise of him even from here, breathing but gone somewhere far down, and were bearing him back into the shelter of the house through a door the elves held open, and the enemy had not touched them because the enemy was still fighting the roses. "He lives, my lord," said Barrow, holding Harry hard against the terrible pull of the open door. "He lives, and he will live if you hold. He was named into your shield holds him. If you break, if you run, the shield breaks, and then he is only a hurt elf in a fallen house. Hold, and he holds too. Do you understand? The best thing you can do for Corin now, the only thing, is to go back to that hearth and hold, and not give the gray man the door he is trying to make you open." Harry stood shaking in the old elf's arms, staring down at the empty terrace where Corin had lain, at the smear of gray figures bearing him into the house, and something in him wanted, with a wild 6-year-old whole body wanting, to run down there, to the door, out into the gardens, to Corin. And he understood, standing on that exact edge, that this was it, this was the whole of it, this was the door Ireland had warned him of, and that Kroll, down in the gardens fighting roses, was not really fighting roses at all. Kroll was fighting for exactly this, for a hurt friend and a child's love and an open door. He turned and went back into the library and sat down in the great chair at the hearth, and put both hands on the arms of it, and did not go to the door, though every part of him screamed to. And it was the hardest thing he had ever done, harder than the wards at the gate, harder than the knife in the bowl, and he did it, and Barrow stood over him with a hand on his shoulder, and Corin was carried past the library door on the way to the cellars where the 2nd ward ran warm and safe. And Harry made himself stay in the chair and let his friend be carried past him, and hold, and it cost him something he would not get back, and he paid it, because the alternative was to lose everything and everyone, and a lord of Heartsmere does not open the door. It was mid-morning before Kroll and the wardbreaker won through the near gardens to the foot of the great terrace stair, bloodied and slowed and short of the patience they had come with, and stood at last before the 2nd ring, the house ward proper, the strong ring, and found that it would not fall the way the boundary had. Dreng worked at it for an hour, and it held. He struck it, and it rang like a bell and threw him back. He unpicked at its seams and found no weak places, because this was the ring the house had warmed with its own reclaimed life, and there were no 100-year frayed knots in it. It was new and old at once, and it burned white and would not fray. And at the end of that hour the burned man stepped back from the shining wall at the foot of the stair, breathing hard, his scarred hands hanging, and turned to his grey master and said the thing Ireland had promised he would say. "That's as far as force goes, Kroll." His gravel voice carried up to the house on the still air. "The outer skin I peeled you. This one I can't, not today, not in a week, maybe not ever. It's not spell work, whatever your instruments told you. It's the old kind, the deep kind, the kind that's got a living heart feeding it, and you don't break the deep kind from outside. I told you that in the room. I open doors, I don't take hearts. That's where my part ends and yours begins." He rolled his scarred shoulders, and there was, under the professional flatness, something almost like unease. "I told you to mind you weren't the something the house fed on. It's fed on your hour and your blood, and it's stronger now than when we started. You want past this wall, you'll not do it with a wand. You'll do it with your tongue, or you'll not do it at all. And Kroll, the good eye found the grey man. I've broken 100 wards, and I'll tell you for free, I don't like the feel of this one. There's a child at the middle of it that loves it, and a house that loves him back, and I've seen what that kind does to men who try to steal it. Pay me and let me go home. This next part's yours." And Ambrose Kroll, standing bloodied at the foot of the stair before a wall of white fire that would not fall, looked up at the great grey house and the small window where he knew now the child must be, and he did not so much as raise his voice, for that was not in his nature, and he did a worse thing. He smiled at last, the smile of a man who has stopped needing force because he has just remembered that he is very, very good with his tongue, and he unrolled his sealed parchment, and he raised his cold clerk's voice to the window, and he began, gently, reasonably, patiently, to talk to a 6-year-old about everything he stood to lose. "Harry," he said, and the use of the name, so mild, so kind, went through the house like cold water, because no enemy had ever said it kindly. "That is your name, isn't it, Harry? I know a great deal about you, Harry, more, I should think, than the creatures in that house have told you. I know you were left on a doorstep. I know you have spent 6 years in a cupboard, unwanted, unloved, a burden to people who never once chose you. I have the file. I am not being cruel, Harry. I am the only person in this whole valley who is telling you the truth. Those elves did not find you out of love. They found you because they need an heir to justify their existence, because a house elf without a master is nothing, less than nothing, and you are the last key that fits their lock. They have dressed it up in stories, I don't doubt, portraits and briars and fires, whatever moves a lonely child, but look at what their love has already done. There is a small gray creature being carried into the cellars of that house who ran into a wall of magic an hour ago, on an errand in a war that a household of grown things sent a child of 6 to fight. That is what their love looks like, Harry. It gets the ones who trust it hurt. Harry sat in the great chair at the hearth with his hands flat on the arms of it, in Corin's absence a cold place at his feet, and he did not answer, and he did not go to the window, and the gray voice came up from the foot of the stair, patient, reasonable, finding the seams the way Dreng had found the seams in the outer ward. I am not here to hurt you, Harry. Understand that. The ministry does not hurt children, the ministry protects them. That is all this is. This house is not safe. You have felt it yourself today, felt the walls being peeled, felt the magic hurt you in your own body, a 6-year-old carrying wards no child should carry. That is not a home, Harry, whatever they told you. That is a weight they have hung around your neck because you are the only one small enough to fit under it. Let me take it. That is my whole errand. Come out, come down the stair, put your hand in mine, and I will lift the whole of it off you forever. No more wards, no more war. No more magic tearing at you while frightened creatures cheer you on from the cellars. A quiet life, a safe one, somewhere warm with people paid to be kind, which is at least honest, which is more than that house is being. All you have to do, Harry, is open the door, one little door, and all of this stops. And it was, Harry understood, sitting very still, exactly the door, not gold, not a threat. Kroll had looked at him and seen, with a clerk's cold accuracy, the one lock a 6-year-old might actually have no key against, which was the fear, buried down under one good summer, that it was all too good to be true, that no one really wanted him, that he had been fooled, that the love was a trick, because for 6 years the world had taught him precisely that lesson and taught it hard. Kroll had found the frayed place. And he was unpicking it, thread by careful thread, exactly as his ward breaker had unpicked the wall. For a moment, one long cold moment, it almost worked. Harry sat in the chair and the gray words wound around him, and he thought about the cupboard, and about being left, and about Corin lying gray and still on the terrace, hurt, on an errand in a war, and something in the very oldest part of him, the part that had learned to want very little, whispered that the gray man was right, that he brought this on them, that it would be kinder to everyone if he just. My lord, old Barrow's voice very quiet at his shoulder. The steward had not moved. He did not argue with the gray man's words, he did something better. He simply held out in his small, dry hand the thing he had been carrying in his livery since dawn, a sprig of white briar cut that morning from the flowers that grew out of season and out of shadow over the place where the house had gathered Mella home. He says the love is a trick, my lord. He says we found you because we needed you. The old elf's eyes were steady and streaming at once. Mella walked 6 years on legs no longer than your arm, and she did not need you, my lord. She was dying. There was nothing left for you to give her. There was no lock of hers you were a key to. She walked until she found you, and then she spent the last of herself to give you a road home, and she went out smiling because she had done it. That is not a creature using a key. That is not what needing looks like. I have served this house 100 years, my lord, and I have told you from the first hour that it does not lie to its heir, and I am not going to start now at the gate with a gray man listening. Everything he says has a true fact in it and a lie wrapped round it. You were left on a doorstep, that is true, and the lie is that it means you are not wanted, when the truth is that your own house crossed 100 miles to claim you. You felt the walls hurt you today, that is true, and the lie is that a home should never cost you anything, when the truth is that everything worth holding costs, and Mella knew it and paid it and would pay it again. He is not offering to lift a weight off you, my lord. He is offering to take your family and call it mercy. You know the difference. You have always known the difference. It is why you laid a sprig of privet by a stranger in a hedge. He pressed the white briar into Harry's hand and closed the small fingers over it, warm. Do not answer him with your fear, my lord. Answer him with that. Harry looked down at the white briar warm in his fist, Mella's flower, and the cold gray words fell off him all at once like a coat he had decided not to wear, and he got up out of the great chair, and he walked to the tall library window, and he opened it, and he leaned out into the morning over the fallen gardens and the wall of white fire and the small gray man at the foot of the stair, and he was 6 years old and he did not shout. Because the house carried his voice for him the way it had carried Kroll's, so that his clear child's voice went down the whole slope of the valley and reached the gray man plainly. You said the elves don't love me, they just need me, Harry said. But you need me more than anyone. You've needed me to stay lost for 11 years so you could take my house. You need me to come out that door right now because you can't get in on your own. You need me to believe I'm not wanted, so I'll give up. That's a lot of needing, Mr. Kroll, for someone who came all this way to tell me nobody wants me. He held up the white briar where the gray man could see it, small and bright against the great gray house. "This is from Mella's grave. She's a house elf. She walked 6 years to find me, and she died happy that she got to. You said that's what needing looks like. It isn't. I know exactly what needing that doesn't love you looks like. I lived in it for 6 years, and it never once walked anywhere to find me, and it never left a light on, and it never grew flowers." His voice did not shake now, not even a little. "So thank you for the offer of a quiet life, but I've got a home and a family and a friend in the cellar who got hurt keeping me safe and who I am going to go and sit with the second you leave, and I'm not opening the door. Not today, not ever." "Go away, Mr. Kroll. You're standing in my garden and nobody invited you." Something changed in the gray man then. The reasonable kindness went out of his face all at once, wiped clean, and what was under it was not heat of any kind, for heat was not in his nature, but something colder and older and far worse. The flat blank patience of a thing that has decided, and Ambrose Kroll rolled up his useless sealed parchment and put it away inside his gray cloak, and drew out instead a second document, black-sealed, that he had hoped not to need. And he looked up at the small figure in the window with eyes like two stopped clocks. "I gave you the kind door, Harry," he said, and his voice had gone very quiet and very final. "Remember that I gave you the kind door first. This one is not kind. This is a writ of compulsory attendance, sealed by the Office of Reversions under emergency provision, and it does not ask you to open anything. It compels the person named within it, the disputed occupant of a hazardous dormant estate, to present himself bodily before the surveying officer, at once, by whatever magic is necessary to effect it. It reaches through wards, Harry. That is what it is for. It will reach into that house, and it will find the name written on it, and it will pull, and no ward on earth may lawfully hold against a sealed writ of the ministry, because the ministry made the law that made the wards." He lifted the black-sealed document, and its seal caught the light and burned an ugly cold green, and Drang, beside him, took one step back, and the burned man's ruined face was grim. "You would not walk out the kind door, so the law will walk you out the other one. This is your last moment as lord of anything, child. When I break this seal, it will take you out of that house whether the house wills it or not, and once you are outside the third ring, once your feet are off the ground the deep magic holds, you are only a disputed minor in ministry custody, and the house is only an empty hazard, and I have won, exactly as I always meant to. Say goodbye to your family, Harry. The law is about to introduce us properly." And Ambrose Kroll raised the black-sealed writ in both gray hands, and set his thumbs to the seal to break it. Deep beneath the house, under the hearth, under the great chair, under the very center of the third ring, in the place where the Anchorstone's twin had lain 1,000 years and where the deepest wards were rooted in the stone, something that had been sleeping even through the waking, something older than the boundary and the house ward and everything Drang had touched, opened one vast and ancient eye, and felt at the very edge of its domain. A cold green thing raised against the child it had reached across 100 miles to claim, and did not like it. The hearth flared, every fire in the house stood up, the anchor stone on the mantel rang like a struck bell and did not stop ringing. And Harry at the window felt the whole enormous body of Hartsmere gather itself beneath and around him. 1,000 years of love made permanent, drawing in its breath at last for something worth spending itself on. And Ireland's voice filled every room of the house at once, no longer warning, no longer grave, but lifted, fierce, exultant, the voice of a warrior queen, 1,000 years dead, watching her enemy make the one mistake she had prayed he would make. "He has raised the law against the deep magic," she cried, in the heart of the deep magic's own valley, in the hearing of its heir. "Oh, foolish gray man, oh, you should have stayed at your desk. To the hearth, my lord, now. Stand in the heart of your house and hold nothing back, for the third ring is waking all the way down to the root of the world, and it is waking for you, and it is not going to peel, and it is not going to fail, and it is about to show a clerk and a wolf and the whole grasping world exactly what a potter's house does to the men who come for its child." Chapter 6 and Chapter 7. The wards of Hartsmere. Harry crossed the library to the hearth and turned and set his back to the fire he had lit, and took the anchor stone down from the mantel and held it in his 2 hands against his chest, warm and heavy and humming, and stood in the very center of the third ring, where 1,000 years of his family had stood before him, and waited for the gray man to break the seal. Down at the foot of the terrace stair, Ambrose Kroll broke it. The black wax split under his gray thumbs with a small, cold sound, and the writ of compulsory attendance woke, and it was an ugly waking. A light the color of pond ice under a dead sky spilled out of the parchment and ran down the gray man's arms and pooled on the ground and then leapt, seeking, up the slope toward the house, up over the white wall of the second ward, which it did not so much break as ignore, sliding through the strong bright fire like cold water through a net, because that was what the writ was made to do, to reach through any ward the ministry's own law had ever licensed, and find the name written on its face and pull. It came up through the gardens and up the terraces and up the walls of Hartsmere, a groping tongue of dead green light, into the house, along the corridors, under the doors, toward the library and the hearth and the small figure standing in the center of the third ring, hunting the name Harry James Potter to close on it and drag it out. It found him. The cold green light poured under the library door and rose up around Harry where he stood at the hearth, and it wrapped him, and it seized and it pulled, and Harry felt the summons take hold of his very name and hall, a cold, enormous grasping directed at the center of who he was, ordering him out of the ring, out of the house, out onto the fallen ground beyond the deep magic where he would be only a disputed child in the gray man's custody. It was strong. It was the concentrated will of the whole ministry of magic bent into a single grasping order, and it pulled at Harry with a force that would have dragged a grown wizard stumbling to the door. And Harry, 6 years old, holding the humming stone against his chest, planted his feet on the hearthstone his family had warmed for 1,000 years and did not go. "No," he said to the cold green light quite quietly. "You've got the wrong boy. You're a paper about a disputed person in a dormant house." "I'm not disputed. I put my blood on the goblin's ledger and I put my family's ring on my hand, and there's nothing dormant about my house. It's the most awake thing there is, so you don't fit. You don't fit me. Let go." And he named his family into the shield. He did not do it with words this time. There was no time for the old formal words, and they were not needed, because he had already named them, one by one in the long night, and now he only gathered them, all of them at once, in the whole warm weight of his held heart. Barrow at his shoulder, and Tibbet in her kitchen, and Hessa in her tower, and Dunn in his gardens, and Corin lying grey and breathing in the cellar, and every elf of the house, and the 100 faces in the long gallery, and the little woven boy Watt in his 600-year field. And the harpsichord that had learned to trust him, and the white briar that was Mella, and the house itself, the stone and the slate and the still dark water and the stopped clock and the lit clock in every warm room of it, and he held all of it at once in the center of himself, and he poured it, the way Mella had poured her light into the earth, down through his hands and into the anchor stone, and down through the anchor stone into the root of the world. And the deep magic of Heartsmere, which was love made permanent, 1,000 years of it, anchored and rooted and bound now to an heir who had just gathered the whole of his family into his arms and refused to let go, woke all the way down and rose. It began at the hearth, and it began as light, but it was not like the light of the fire, and it was not like the cold light of the writ, and it was not like anything Harry had seen even in the waking of the wards at the gate. It came up out of the hearthstone and out of the anchor stone in his hands and out of the very center of him, gold and green and white all together, and it did not flicker or leap. It welled steady and vast and unhurried, the way deep water wells up from a spring that has no bottom, and it filled the library, and it did not stop at the library. It went out through the walls into every room of the house at once, and everywhere it went the deep magic woke behind it, ancestor by ancestor, age by age, the whole 1,000-year memory of the line rising all together to stand between a gray man and its child. Harry felt them come. He felt Linford first, oldest and dimmest and kindest, the healer who had gone down into the goblin dark, and the deep magic tasted of Linford's mercy, a warmth that did not want to harm even the thing it was rising against. He felt Hardwin, the builder, and the magic went strong and square and unbreakable as a foundation stone. He felt Iolanth, and the Peveril deep magic came up cold and fierce and radiant, the oldest and strongest strand of all, the magic that did not lose to grasping men and never had. He felt his grandfather Henry and his father James, whom he had never met, and felt now, a laughing brightness, a door held against the dark. And none of it crushed him, though by any reckoning the weight of 1,000 years falling through one small living point ought to have crushed him utterly. It did the opposite. It held him up, the way the water of the mere held up the heron, the way the wards had held him at the gate on the first morning, and he understood, standing in the middle of the rising light with the anchor stone blazing in his hands, that he was not carrying his family after all. He never had been. From the moment Mella found him in the hedge, it had been the other way around. They had been carrying him, all of them, the whole long line of them, hand to hand across 1,000 years and 100 miles, and all he had ever had to do, all he had to do now was let them, and hold the door, and be worth the carrying. He felt all of them, every Potter that ever loved this valley, the whole river of the gallery pouring their 1,000 years down into the one small living point of the line that held the anchor stone at the hearth, and the light of it swelled and swelled until it was too bright for the house to hold, and then the house gave it a shape. It rose up out of the roof of Heartsmere into the morning sky, vast, and it was the heart. It stood over the whole valley, made of ward light, gold and white and green, a stag the size of the house itself and larger, its head lifted, its antlers spread across the sky like the branches of the first tree of the world, and it was the crest of the Potters made real and awake and enormous, the standing heart that had waited on the gate and at the head of the stair and stitched on Mella's breast and worked into a ring and a hearthstone. And it stood now over its valley in a blaze of the deep magic and looked down with eyes like 2 green suns at the 2 small gray figures at the foot of the terrace stair, and the whole of Heartsmere, every stone and every soul, living and painted and remembered, stood behind those eyes and looked with it. Ambrose Kroll looked up at the thing standing over the valley, and for the first time in 11 patient years, something crossed his gray face that had never been there before, and it was not calculation and it was not confidence. And Dreng the Wardbreaker took one look at the heart of light filling the sky and did the wisest thing he had done all day, which was to turn and drop his fee and run for the tree line without a backward glance, because he had broken 100 wards and he knew, as only such a man could know, that he was looking at something that had never once been broken and never would be, and that it had woken up, and that it was awake now, and it was angry, and it was aimed. The writ died first. The cold green light that had wrapped Harry and hauled at his name met the welling gold of the deep magic and simply came apart, unraveled, the way a lie comes apart when the plain truth is finally spoken over it, because the writ was law, and law was young, a thing of a few centuries, a thing of offices and seals and the ministry that made it. And the deep magic of Heartsmere was 1,000 years older than the oldest law in Britain, and did not recognize its authority any more than the sea recognizes a line drawn on a map. The parchment in Kroll's hands blackened and curled and crumbled to cold ash, and its dead green light guttered out of the house and off of Harry all at once, and Harry drew a great breath as the grasping let go of his name, and stood free in the center of the ring with the anchor stone blazing in his hands. Then the heart lowered its head. It did not charge and it did not strike, because the deep magic of Heartsmere was made of Linfred's mercy as much as Island's fire, and it did not in the end want to destroy even the grey man who had come for its child. That was not what it was for, that was not what a potter's house was. It lowered its antlered head over the valley and it breathed, and its breath was the wind of 1,000 years, and that wind came down the slope and across the fallen gardens and struck Ambrose Kroll where he stood alone at the foot of the stair. And it was not a killing wind and it was not a cruel one, but it was utterly irresistible, the massed refusal of 1,000 years of a family that had decided altogether that this man would not have their child, and it took him up off his feet, gently, terribly. And it carried him, not battered, not broken, but wholly and finally expelled, back down the slope he had climbed so slowly, back across the fallen gardens where the roses drew aside to let him pass, back over the line of the boundary his wardbreaker had peeled, and set him down beyond it, outside, in the ordinary field at the edge of the valley, on his back, staring up at the heart of light that stood over everything he had spent 11 years trying to steal, and would now never touch. And as it set him down, the deep magic did one thing more, because it was old and it was wise, and it understood that a grey man expelled would only find another door, and it had had, in the person of its heir, a very hard lesson that morning in exactly how such men worked. The heart looked down at Ambrose Kroll lying in the field, and it laid upon him a mark, not a wound, not a curse of the kind that maims, but a testimony, a truth written into him by the deep magic that could not be argued with in any court of wizards or goblins. A mark that any magical creature or ward or officer of the law would read at a glance, and that said in the language older than language, this one came against a woken house and its lawful child, and was cast out and is forsworn. It was a brand of fact. It would follow him. He would never again pass a ward that did not know him for what he was. He would never again file a claim that the reading of him did not damn. He would never again stand before the office of reversions and be believed, because the deep magic had testified against him, and the deep magic did not lie, and everyone who mattered knew it did not lie. Ambrose Kroll would carry the truth of this morning on him for the rest of his grey life, and it would unmake him more thoroughly and more lawfully than any curse, because it would simply, everywhere he went, tell the truth. Then the heart lifted its head, and the wind died, and the enormous golden green light of it began slowly to sink back down into the house, degree by degree, the way it had risen, drawn back down through the roof and the walls and the corridors into the anchor stone and the hearth in the center of the small figure who held them, banking itself back down to the deep steady glow of coals of a hearth kept in. Until the morning sky over the valley was ordinary blue again, and the only light left was the fire in the grate and the warm stone in Harry's 2 hands, and Harry stood alone in the center of the 3rd ring, 6 years old, having held his whole family in his arms and refused to let go, and having, in doing it, called up 1,000 years to stand between them and the dark. The house was very quiet. Then from the long gallery and the kitchens and the tower and the cellars and every warm room of Heartsmere at once, the household of the house began softly to cheer, and it rose and it swelled, 30 voices of elves and 100 voices of portraits and the deep bell of the woken clock and the bright 3 notes of the harpsichord all together, a sound that had not been heard in that valley in 1,000 years, and perhaps had never been heard there at all. The sound of a house that has defended its child and won, and Harry stood in the middle of it holding the anchor stone, and his legs gave out at last, gently, and he sat down on the warm hearthstone with the humming stone in his lap, and old Barrow was there at once and gathered him in, and Harry let himself be gathered, wrung out and shaking and entirely, finally safe, in the arms of the steward of his house, in the heart of the home that had reached across 100 miles to claim him and had just, in front of the whole grasping world, refused to let him go. They came for Kroll within the hour, and it was the goblins who brought them. Gorbrand had felt the token move. The small iron mark Harry carried had woken the moment the deep magic rose, and Gorbrand, keeper of the Potter accounts, had come himself the old way, appearing at the newly restored boundary of the valley with a party of the bank's own, and walking sourly beside them under a flag of truce he plainly resented. 2 officers of the Ministry's own Department of Magical Law Enforcement, who had been given by the Director of Vaults personally, and with the full weight of the bank's displeasure behind it. A very great deal of documentation. They found Ambrose Kroll where the heart had set him down, in the field beyond the boundary on his back, staring at the sky, with the deep magic's testimony branded plain upon him for any officer to read, and they read it and their faces changed, and then they read the documents Gringotts had brought, which laid out in the bank's cold exact hand. 11 years of a deputy escheator quietly suppressing the question of the Potter heir's whereabouts in order to run the clock toward an escheat he meant to harvest for himself, and the forging of an emergency hazard survey against a lawfully sealed and goblin-witnessed estate, and the hiring of an unlicensed cursebreaker to assault a warded home containing a 6-year-old child. It was, the senior officer said, more than enough. It was, in fact, a great deal more than enough. Ambrose Kroll did not so much as raise his voice as they bound his wand and read him the shape of his ruin, because raising his voice was not in his nature, and there was in any case nothing left to say. The deep magic had already said all of it, written into his own skin, unarguable. The patient gray man who had spent 11 years harvesting the dead had been undone in a single morning by the one house he should have left asleep, and by a child who thanked goblins and would not open the door. They took him away to answer for the whole of it, and he went quietly, a small gray figure diminishing across the ordinary field, and Harry watched from the terrace with Barrow's hand on his shoulder and did not gloat, because gloating was not in his nature either, and only said, when the gray man was finally gone from sight, "I hope somebody's kind to him, even him. Nobody made him be like that, but somebody could still be kind." And Barrow looked at the child who had just cast a man out of his valley, and whose first thought at the end of it was mercy for the man, and had to turn away again and busy himself, and did not trust his voice for some little while. Gorbrand stayed long enough to see the estate secured, and to accept with enormous goblin dignity a cup of Tibbet's cocoa, which he pretended not to enjoy and drank all of, and to tell Harry that the whole of the Potter accounts were now not merely sealed but famous quietly in the deep places where such things mattered, because word had already gone through the goblin nation that the deep magic of Heartsmere had woken and stood a full defense and cast out a ministry man and branded him forsworn. And that this had not happened in living memory or the memory before it, and that the young lord who had done it had, on top of it all, wished mercy on the man he cast out, which the goblins found frankly incomprehensible, and for reasons none of them could have explained, deeply reassuring. "Come to the bank when you are grown, young lord," Gorbrand said at the boundary before he left, "and we will build something, you and I and Ragnarok, 100 years of a Potter and Gringotts trusting one another, and it will be worth more than every vault beneath the city. You have made a fair beginning. You have made, I will go so far as to say, a good one." And he bowed low the old goblin, keeper of the accounts, and took his party and his officers and his prisoner and was gone, and the valley of Heartsmere was, for the first time in 100 years, wholly at peace and wholly awake and wholly the child's. Harry went down to the cellars the moment they let him, to Corin. The young elf lay on a cot in the warm deep room where the second ward ran strongest, small and grey and still, with Hessa and Tibbet keeping watch over him, and Linfred's own healing chest open on the floor beside him, its remedies that did not spoil doing their slow ancient work. And when Harry came in and knelt by the cot and took the small limp hand, Corin's eyes were closed and his breathing was shallow and far away, and for a long moment Harry knelt there and was very frightened and did not say so. And only held the hand. "Will he wake up?" he asked. "He is coming back, my lord," said Hessa, and her deep-well eyes were tired and certain. "The ward blow drove him deep, deeper than a body likes to go, but you never let go of him, do you understand? Through the whole of it, through the grey man and the writ and the rising of the heart, you held him named in your shield, you never once let him fall out of it, even when it would have been easier, even when your own name was being hauled at, you held him. And so he has a thread to follow home, and he is following it slow, but he is following it. Talk to him, my lord. He followed you at 6 feet all summer. He will follow your voice up out of the dark. Only give him something to walk toward." So Harry sat on the floor of the cellar by the cot and held the small grey hand and talked, for a long time, about nothing, about everything. About the harpsichord and the woven boy Watt and the constellations on the dining hall ceiling and the puddings Tibbet was going to make when Corin was well. About all the years they were going to have now that the grey man was gone and the house was safe. All the ordinary days, the polishing and the gardening and the learning of letters. All of it stretching out ahead of them warm and unhurried in theirs, and somewhere in the middle of the third hour the small hand in his tightened, just faintly, and Corin's eyes opened a slit and found Harry's face, and the young elf breathed in a thread of a voice. Did Did we hold the gate, my lord? And Harry, whose face was wet, said, We held the gate, Corin, you and me and everybody. Nobody took it. You can rest now. You did so well. You held the gate. And Corin's eyes closed again, but easier now, and his breathing deepened toward sleep, real sleep, the kind you come back from, and Tibbet made a sound behind her apron, and Hessa put her old hand on Harry's head, and the worst of it was over. In the quiet days that followed, while Corin mended and the house set itself to rights, Harry went up to the long gallery alone because he wanted to, and walked the length of it in the afternoon light, and the faces turned to him as he came, and there was something different in them now, a settledness, the look of people who have watched one of their own do a hard and worthy thing and no longer have anything to prove to him or he to them. He went down to the far end, to the old ones, and stood before the two great frames and the dim golden one beyond, and did not speak, and let them look at him. You held the door, said Ireland at last. Her deep voice was quiet. I have watched 11 generations of this line pass through that gallery, child, and I told each of them when they were small, the thing I told you on your first day, that the wards are love made permanent, and that they cannot be broken from without, only surrendered from within. And not one of them in 11 generations ever truly understood it, because not one of them was ever tested to the root of it, as you were at 6 years old, by a man who knew exactly which door to try. He offered you the surrender dressed as mercy. He offered you the flight dressed as safety. He put his cold thumb on the one frayed place in you and pressed, and I stood in this frame and could not help you, none of us could, because it was the one battle that only the heir can fight alone in the center with his own held heart. Her dark eyes were bright, and you held. A starved child who had every reason in the world to believe he was not loved held 1,000 years of us together in his arms and would not open the door. Do you know what you are, Harry Potter? You are the answer to a question this house has been asking for 11 generations. You are proof that the deep magic was right to be made of love and not of fear all those centuries ago. Some of us wondered in the dark years. We do not wonder any more. Your father would be insufferable, said old Henry Potter from his frame, and his weathered face was wet and grinning at once. You understand that, James, if he could see this, he would not stop talking about it for 100 years. He would bore the whole gallery to tears. My son held the gate at 6. Have I mentioned, did I say at 6? The old man laughed, and it broke, and he let it. And he would be right too, because you did, lad, you did, and your mother. Henry's voice gentled. Your mother stood over your cradle and would not step aside, and something in the love of that saved your life once when you were too small to know it. And now here you are, 6 years on, standing in the heart of your house, refusing to step aside, and something in the love of that has saved it whole. That is not chance, Harry. That is a line. That is what it means to come of people. You did not only inherit a house. You inherited how they loved, and you have already at 6 loved exactly as well as the best of them, and there is not one soul in this gallery who does not know it, and not one who is not the better this afternoon for having lived to see it. Harry stood in the long light and looked at the faces of his own blood looking back at him, and in the dim corner the oldest of them all, Linfrid, opened his kind eyes once more, the third time in 100 years, and Harry felt the slow warm words come into him again, sunlight through deep water. Well done, little one. The line goes on. And this time, before the eyes closed, the faded golden figure lifted one painted hand just slightly off his lap, in something that was almost a blessing and almost a wave, and then settled back into sleep, and Harry understood that he had been given, by the first of the Potters, the thing the first of the Potters had to give. Not gold, not magic, but the plain deep human kindness that had begun the whole 1,000-year line in the dark of a goblin tunnel, and had come down, unbroken, hand to hand and heart to heart, all the way to a child in a too big shirt standing in the afternoon light, and would go on now because of him. They held the remembrance for Mella 3 evenings later, when Corin was well enough to be carried out into the garden to see it, wrapped in blankets and propped in a chair and fussed over past all bearing, which he suffered with the dignity of an elf who has been struck down in the defense of his house and knows it. The whole household came, all 30 of them, out into the walled herb garden where the 4 paths met and the white briar grew, blooming now more thickly than ever, hundreds of the small warm glowing flowers open in the blue evening, and the one-armed tin soldier still standing sentinel in the moss at its foot. The portraits could not come, being fixed where they hung, but the house carried the garden to them, opened every window that looked upon it, so that the whole long gallery could see, and old Henry Potter and Ireland and Hardwin and all the river of the line watched from their frames through the open windows as their heir knelt down in the moss before the briar in the blue evening, to give an old elf her due. He did not make a long speech. He was 6, and he had learned that the truest things are usually short. This is Mella, he said to the household, to the watching windows, to the flowers. She was Barrow's sister. She was the oldest of you, and she rocked my dad to sleep when he was little, and she sewed my mum's wedding hem. And when everybody thought I was lost forever and there was nothing to be done, she said, while there's a drop of a Potter alive, I'll keep walking. And she walked 6 years to find me, on legs no bigger than mine, and she found me in a hedge in a garden with no love in it, and she was so happy. And then she gave me everything she had left, the whole road home, so I could come here to all of you. She never got to see it. She never got to see the house wake up, or the fire lit, or the gate held. She did it all without ever knowing if it would work. His voice was steady. So I want it said out loud in front of everyone that it worked. Mella, it worked. The house is awake, and the fire is lit, and the gate is held, and I'm home. And it's because of you, all of it, everything, and this whole family is here tonight because you wouldn't stop walking. I'm going to make sure nobody ever forgets it. Every year on this evening we're going to come out here, all of us, and I'm going to tell it again, the whole story, so that in 100 years there will be a Potter kneeling here who never met you telling their whole household about the elf who wouldn't stop walking. That's a promise, that's a Lord's promise, and the house heard me make it. He put his marked hand flat on the warm earth before the briar, palm down, as she had done in the hedge, as he had done the first day, and the mark glowed, and the white flowers glowed to answer it. Thank you for finding me, Mella. I've been brave, and I've been kind, kindest of all, like you said. Rest now. We've got it from here. And the white briar, out of season, out of shadow, blazed for a moment all along its length, every flower at once, warm and gold-white in the blue dusk, and then settled back to its steady glow. And the household of Hartsmere bowed their heads in the garden and were silent, elf and portrait and living child together. And above them the first star came out over the western hills, where the lamp in the tower was already lit, and would be lit every night forever. For the family that had kept faith, and the elf who had walked 6 years, and the child who had come home, he had to go back to Privet Drive that night. That was the hard truth under the whole warm evening, and Barrow had told him plainly, days before, because the house did not lie to its heir. The deep magic could cast out a grey man with a writ, but it could not yet undo the older, stranger protection that a powerful wizard had bound to a house in Surrey and a woman who shared his mother's blood. And until Harry was grown, until the day the protections could be safely unwound and the world could be told, he would still have to sleep some nights under the Dursley stairs and be Harry Nobody and count the rashers and be out of the way. It was not fair. Barrow said so himself flatly, that it was not fair, because a house that does not lie does not pretend that hard things are fair. But it was, for now, the shape of things. And Harry found, standing at the gate that night with the road folded and waiting to take him back to the cold, that it did not sit cold on him the way it once would have, and barely tugged at him at all, and he understood why, and he told Barrow because he thought the old elf should hear it. It's all right, he said, going back. It really is now, because it was never the cupboard that was the bad part, not really. The bad part was thinking nobody would ever come, thinking that was all there was forever, and no one in the whole world knew I was there or wanted me. He looked up the valley at the great lit house and the one bright window in the tower. But that's not true anymore, and it's never going to be true again. I can sit in that cupboard now, and I'll know exactly where my home is, and exactly who's keeping the light on, and exactly how to get there the second I can slip away. It's the same cupboard, but it's not the same at all. A cupboard you sit in knowing you're loved isn't a prison, Barrow. It's just a place you're waiting, and I'm good at waiting. I've had loads of practice, and now I've got something to wait for. He put his marked hand up on the cold iron of the gate over the stag, and the road opened, gold-green and warm, running up out of the valley toward the ordinary world. Keep the fire lit, look after Corin. Tell everyone I'll be back the first morning they leave me on my own. And then, because it was true, and because he wanted the old elf to have it, I'll be back before you've even lit the lamp tomorrow. This is home now. That's not going to change just because I have to sleep somewhere else for a while. Home doesn't stop being home when you're not in it. It just leaves a light on. And Barrow, steward of Hartsmere, keeper of the house through 100 years of empty waiting, who had buried the road behind 2 generations and thought he would keep it to the end of him and never see this day, looked at the small child standing in the gold light of the road with the ring on his hand and the deep magic bound to his heart, and the whole 1,000-year weight of the line carried in him as lightly as a boy carries a stone from a beloved stream, and he did not this time turn away to hide his face. He let Harry see it. He knelt down on the worn stone of the threshold, the old elf, and he pressed his brow to the small marked hand, a steward's homage to his lord, and he said, "Go on then, my lord. Go and come back as often as you can and for as long as you must, and know that this house will be here every single time, lit and warm and waiting, until the day you are grown and we can bring you home for good and you never have to leave again. That day is coming, my lord. I have waited 100 years for far less certain things. I can wait a little more for that." He rose. "The lamp will be burning, it is always burning. Look for it on the worst of your nights to the north and a little west, and know it is lit for you and only you and always will be. Now go home to the cold, my lord, and carry the warm in you where they cannot reach it. We will see you in the morning." Harry stepped onto the road, and it took him, and folded the 100 miles, and set him down in the alley behind the gardens of Privet Drive in the last of the dark, and he let himself in the back door with the key from the hook, and eased the bolt home a hair at a time, and crept across the kitchen and into the cupboard under the stairs, and pulled the door to, and sat down on the thin mattress in the familiar dark with his knees drawn up. And it was the same cupboard, exactly the same crack of the vent, the same smell, the same silence, the same sleeping house of people who did not want him snoring overhead. But it was not the same at all, and it would never be the same again. He opened his marked hand in the dark. The stag glowed in his palm, faint and gold and warm, and when he turned it, the pull behind his breastbone answered, north and a little west, quiet and permanent and sure, a thread tied to the middle of him with the other end held by a whole household that loved him. He thought of the fire he had lit, burning steady in the hearth. He thought of Corin, sleeping and mending. He thought of the white briar glowing in the dark garden and the household who would come to it every year to tell an old elf that her walking had worked. He thought of the heart of light standing over the valley, 1,000 years risen to stand between him and the dark, and of the fact that it was his, that it had always been his, that it would be his forever, and that no gray man and no cold cupboard and no long stretch of waiting could ever take it away, because it was not made of stone, whatever it looked like. It was made of exactly the thing that Mella had spent herself to give him, and that thing does not lose in the end to the grasping world. It only sometimes has to wait. Somewhere to the north and a little west, in a valley the maps did not show, high in a tower, an old elf named Hessa set a lamp in a window and stood beside it, keeping the light as she had every night for 101 years, and would every night for 100 more. And far to the south, in a cupboard under the stairs, a small boy with a stag glowing warm in his palm looked toward it through the dark and the miles, and smiled and was not alone, and was not unwanted, and was, for the first time in the whole of his life and for all the rest of it to come, exactly and certainly and forever at home. Chapter 7 End.